All right. Can you guys hear me now? It was a fluke as far as I can tell it, but hopefully everything is working. You know what's wild about it? From my end, everything looks normal. I can even see the typical volume stuff, but for whatever reason, you guys couldn't hear me before. Even when I went through all of the sound checks, there was no issue. What about now? Can you guys hear me okay currently? Is everything good? I see there are about 4 people here. Hopefully everyone comes back. Can you guys hear me? Can you guys hear me? Can you all hear me all right? How's the sound? How's the sound? Excellent. Good. Yeah, I got to be honest. I don't know what was going on. From my end, everything looked okay. All of my sound checks, all of the volume, all of that stuff. Everything looked perfectly fine. And then, but for whatever reason, none of you could hear me. Excellent. Good. All right. As I was saying before going into 15 minutes when nobody can hear me, today is going to be a damn good show, even though starting off, it hasn't necessarily been that great. We're going to have Ritter. We're going to have sound check. The sound check is normally good. In fact, I could see all of the volume settings and all my volume settings, the bar and everything was going up. But for whatever reason, you just couldn't hear me. Fair enough. We will keep it moving. Look, I want to thank all of you for joining me. You guys could be anywhere, but you guys are here, and I appreciate you guys for being here. I have a damn good show for you today. Scott Ritter is going to join me at 7. Well, he's going to be joining me now. At least I hope he's going to be joining me now. Let me make sure. Ready for you now. Yeah, so Ritter should be joining me now or very soon. Caleb Maupin is going to be joining me at 8:15. And later on in the show, we're going to have Margaret Kimberly. Margaret Kimberly is a fan favorite. She is easily one of my favorite people to talk to. She will be joining me shortly. And we're also going to have Andrew Wong and Peter Coffin. They're going to be at odds, I would imagine, with each other on various stories that we are going to hit. So the guests should be damn good. Hopefully, Ritter is going to be joining me soon. I sent him the new link. In fact, I had to send everyone the new link for the show. Anytime the show gets killed, everything has to basically start from scratch. Nevertheless, we will move on, and we are going to put this bad beginning behind us. As I was pointing out, Daniel Perry, the subway choker, he won his case. He was acquitted. Now, this was the guy who choked, I can't remember the guy's name, Jordan something, to death on the subway, basically, in a chokehold. Jordan Neely, I believe the name, was scaring people on the subway. He was apparently being aggressive. They said he has mental illness, not to mention some of the other problems that he was dealing with. Whatever. He was freaking people out on the subway, and the people, Daniel, gets involved, puts him in a chokehold, and chokes him literally to death. I don't know why he couldn't release the chokehold at a certain point before he dropped dead, but whatever, choked him to death. And in the situation that we have, he goes to court, he's arrested, and he is released by a jury of his peers. So that case is taking place. We're also in the beginning of what I'm calling the decapitation of Syria. Israel has moved in. At this point, they're 20 kilometers from Damascus. You have some people in Israel saying that they should take over all of Damascus, basically take over Syria, creating the Greater Israel Project going forward. And you also have the decapitation of the Syrian military, meaning the armaments that are left over being fundamentally destroyed. Syria has done a hell of attacks, over hundreds of attacks Israel has done hundreds of attacks over in Syria since the fall of the government, destroying air assets, armaments, everything else. Also, you have this situation where the military just didn't fight. For example, all of this equipment. Shout out to Lord Bebo, he's been doing God's work. Just left behind. They seem to just threw the armaments down and left. This gets even wilder when you look at the other situation of them not just leaving, but even leaving tanks behind. Oh, the one and only Ritter, weapons of mass destruction, whistleblower. How you doing, Ritter? You doing okay? You doing okay this morning?
I'm doing well. I'm like anybody who's been following these issues, trying to figure out what's going on, why is it going on, how it happened. Anybody who claims that they have the absolute knowledge of this is probably confused as anybody else.
I am shocked. Yeah. I am legitimately shocked. The last time around this happened, Bashar al-Assad fought like grim death, meaning holding on to power. And even to the point where the majority of Syria had been taken at that point, he still stayed and fought. This time around.
Yeah, the lion.
Yeah, I mean, this time around, not so much. Didn't give any statements. The people threw down their weapons and left. And even in some, pockets where the Syrian military fought, the overwhelming majority, they just weren't fights. They just left. I was showing the audience where Russians were showing the equipment that was just laying on the ground where the Syrians had basically abandoned it. Even like heavy, like tanks, heavy armored vehicles, all of that stuff was just left behind as they left. At this point, Israel has taken to decapitating the country, moving all the way 20 kilometers to Damascus. I mean, from your assessment of it, and I'm going to have right many questions this time around just because I'm somewhat confused about all of this. Why did it fall so quickly? Why did they throw down their weapons and leave? Why didn't Assad fight this time around? What happened from your point of view as far as you can tell?
Well, again, I'm still digging into this. Look, there's things that we did know. We did know that the Ba'athist government of Hafiz al-Assad, Bashar's father, was a government that was composed of an Alawite minority. The Alawites are a religious offshoot of the Shia faith. I don't want to get into theocratic discussions here. The majority of the population of Syria is Sunni. We can also say that Syria, like Iraq, is an artificial country, meaning that it was put together by Western hands drawing lines on a map. And it brought together people that may have lived under Ottoman rule, but that Ottoman rule, they had a governorate. They had that reported to Istanbul, Constantinople. Now they became a nation, and the nation has always been struggling with itself. And the same thing happened in Iraq when the Ba'athist government that eventually was led by Saddam Hussein. You have an idea of nationalism that's trying to cobble together, different groups. When you have tribes, Arab tribes that cross boundaries. If you go out into south northeastern Syria, the tribal elements that are there, their loyalties are to the tribes, and many of those tribes look elsewhere besides Damascus for their rule. So here comes this minority that's trying to create a nation state, and he does it by surrounding himself with loyalists. people he can trust. And early on in a Ba'athist movement, a Ba'athist revolution, because they came to power through revolution, you have people that believe in the revolution. But eventually what happens is you dig in, and because there is no democracy, you become that, I guess, which you despise. The Hafez al-Assad stopped being a revolutionary leader and became a dictator. And the people around him stopped being revolutionaries, and they became sycophants to a dictator. And they began to enjoy the privileges of power. And this is the problem, the notion of the privileges of power. They set up their own little economic fiefdoms to enrich themselves. They become very wealthy while other people don't. And they rule through fear, because revolutionaries, that's what revolutionaries do. They rule through fear. And then if you haven't, knocked off the old regime and replaced something that empowers the people, you end up ruling the people through fear. The groups that were opposed, for instance, the Muslim Brotherhood, if you remember the 1980s, early 1980s in Homs, there was a horrible massacre. There was fighting. A military academy was attacked by the Muslim Brotherhood revolutionaries, counter-revolutionaries, if that's how you want to view it. And the city was surrounded, bombarded, and the Muslim Brotherhood was ejected from Syria. And anybody who was associated with them were rounded up, put in prison, and life was not good. In fact, his life usually ended. This was the government of Hafez al-Assad. When they moved into Lebanon to counter or to take advantage of the power vacuum that took place in Lebanon when the Israelis invaded, there was a civil war, etc. Syria moved in to help, install the stability, and the Syrian forces occupied Lebanon. And what happened is that occupation turned into, again, sort of a colonial occupation where the general who was in charge, this was his fiefdom. He became very rich, and the corruption was rampant. You had a Syrian army that, believed in the nation. They fought. I mean, they were very good. I mean, even though they were defeated in 1973, they fought hard. The Syrians fought hard in Lebanon. They're the basic soldier stock is not a bad stock. We saw that when they resisted everything that happened later. In 2000, when Hafez al-Assad died, power was supposed to be turned over to the older brother of Bashar, but he died in a car accident. He had been groomed to be the next Hafez al-Assad. That means that all of the governors, the corrupt governors, because again, the problem with corruption is that everybody's corrupt. The government is corrupt. Everything becomes a money-making opportunity. Any business that succeeds will have the knock at the door and say, thank you for setting up our business. It's our business. Now you can become a minority. And anybody who objects, because this is a brutal regime, gets arrested and put in prison. That was the reality. And this dentist, this younger son who never wanted to be president, this was not his ambition. He was happy being a London-educated dentist, was suddenly told, you're the president of Syria. And he came in and he hadn't been groomed. He didn't know the generals. He didn't have corrupt agreements with the governors. He came in and thought he was going to change things. He came in and when this is bad, I'm going to change things. And one of the first things he did is shut down the Lebanese occupation, and the corrupt general, he fired that general, shut down that whole corruption thing, tried to take it down. And he immediately ran into a buzzsaw of opposition inside Syria from all the Baathists and the generals who had their own fiefdoms who said, you can't do that. He's one of us. And there was problems. And so that process of trying to take down corruption caused him to step back and think, okay, well, I'm going to work with these people to reform these people. And that was one of his constant struggles, working to reform Syria with people who were used to the corruption of the father and were not willing to give that corruption up. And he started to make progress. It was imperfect. There were lurches and all that stuff, but then history conspired against him. First of all, 6 years after he came into power, as he's trying to do these things, there's a drought in Syria, and that drought led to massive problems in the countryside. And Bashar al-Assad, remember, I just want to remind people, he didn't want to be president. He wasn't groomed to be president. He wasn't prepared to be president, and he became president. And so now 6 years in, while he's trying to fight and reform, you have these giant problems, and he fumbled it. The Syrian government did not do a good job in responding to the needs of the people in the countryside to the drought. People fled the countryside, came to the city, and there was no plan to deal with them. And so there's this problem. And then to make up for, you had this issue of villages that had been abandoned, crops that weren't being planted. Money started coming in from abroad. Saudi Arabia started investing. But when Saudi Arabia invests, it's not just the money. Next thing you know, there's an imam that comes in with the money to rebuild the mosque, to become the center of the cultural and religious heart of this village that's going to be revived. They rebuild the village, the people return, but now there's an imam who's now saying, motivating people. And half the things they say is, remember who came to save you and remember who abandoned you. And so now you start to get dissent taking place there. Within the fractured society, because of this, the Muslim Brotherhood starts to return. They had fled to Turkey, which had received them. And suddenly Erdogan, who was the best friend of Assad, because when Assad was young, when he first became president, he's just imagine being a 30-year-old, dentist with a beautiful wife and a family. What do? Well, you work, and then you go on vacations, and you're a fun guy. Carefree life. And he used to go out and vacation with Erdogan. They used to talk. Erdogan sort of was like the older brother that Assad had lost. And so Erdogan would bring him in and talk to him, say, hey, this is how you do things. Don't worry about that. This will work out. We'll make this happen. But the fact is, no matter what Erdogan told Assad, the regime, the Ba'athist regime, wasn't going along with it, because it's all about the money, all about the corruption. 2011 comes along, Arab Spring, and now the West decides that they're going to bring down Bashar al-Assad. Because there's the other aspect of what's going on, that Syria has always been a thorn in the side of the Arab League, etc. Syria, yes, Egypt and Syria were allied in their war against Israel, but Syria aligned against Iraq. If you look at the old, there's a name for it, the Arab Republic or something, you had 3 stars. Those 3 stars were Egypt, Syria, and Iraq. Well, Syria and Iraq had been going at it. Syria sided with Iran during the Iran-Iraq War and supported Iran, and so there's a lot of Arab nations, there's a lot of enmity towards Assad, especially in the Gulf Arab states. And so when
I thought that was resolving, though. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I thought that was resolving. Like, this time around, from my understanding, Turkey, Israel, and the United States effectively had all sorts of reasons for trying to get rid of Assad. Turkey stabbed both in the back. Well, Turkey stabs Putin, and for that matter, Iran, in the back in the Astana agreements that they effectively just blew off. And I guess my thought is, I agree with you in the very beginning, all of those Gulf states were trying to get rid of Assad, but I thought they had resolved those issues. Assad seemingly was getting closer back into the kind of Arab states.
Well, but you can't see, you can't jump. That's why I was going through this thing, because
okay, go for it.
one of the problems that's happening today is everybody's jumping to the present. For instance, again, I'm not a defender of Erdogan. I'm not, but you can't just sit here and say he blew off Astana. You want to know why? Because Astana was imposed on him. If I came to you and said, Jamal, sit down, here's a gun to your head, sit down, shut up, sign the paper. And then later on, when you became a little bit more powerful, you went, I'm not so happy about that paper you made me sign.
I see.
Did I stab you in the back? Did you stab me in the back when you said, I'm not doing that anymore? No, you didn't. The situation evolved. Astana process was a process that Russia and Iran imposed on Turkey when Turkey did not have enough power to deal. Turkey was brought in and basically dictated solutions, not because Turkey's an innocent party, but because Turkey was a weaker party at that time. That's the problem with the Astana process, is that it's presented as diplomacy, but a lot of diplomacy is coercion, arm twisting, and things of that nature. So, but that's why it's so important to figure out how we got it. Remember, the Arab states started investing in Syria long ago, but they were investing in getting rid of Assad. Money poured in. They started creating from these different communities of now radicalized population with another returning radicalized population out of Turkey. You start to get things. Meanwhile, the West is coming in with all of its money. If you remember, there was a period of time when a guy named Jared Cohen, he wrote a book about his travels around the Middle East. He spent some time in Lebanon with what he claims to be Hezbollah people, although Hezbollah purists were like, I don't think they were. They might have known some about Hezbollah, but I don't think he was talking to actual Hezbollah people because, but he's like, they're just like us. All they want to do is get on the internet and go around and bypass all this nonsense. Digital democracy was his thing. Digital democracy. It's beautiful. If we just bring the internet to the youth, they will change society. Digital democracy is wonderful. And then, they took this naive kid about digital democracy, brought him in the State Department, and all the old CIA people were going, yeah, tell us about this social influencing thing. And Jared may about that still believe it's digital, and the CIA is going, this is how we can overthrow governments. Digital democracy. We like this stuff. Yeah. Come on, boy. Tell me more about your digital democracy. And they took this and they started to undermine society. Google would come in, Facebook. Jared Cohen later on went to Facebook and was doing stuff. If you remember, there was a period of time when Jared Cohen, when he was with the State Department, Twitter was supposed to go down for maintenance during the Green Revolution in Iran. And Jared Cohen went to Twitter and said, keep it up, baby. We need Twitter right now because the people we trained that are inside Iran using digital democracy tools are out there doing their damnedest to create a information warfare against the regime by publishing things, and we need Twitter to stay up. Well, before there was Iran, I think Iran might have been the first one. I think Iran happened first. Those digital democracy tools were then applied to Syria. The West came in, and I always love it. I mean, I got confronted the other night. I did a book event in Washington, D.C., and I said, look, the black flag of jihad is risen over Damascus. Yeah. And it's a very sad day. I got confronted by a lady who brought in her ring and showed me the ring was the new flag of the Free Syrian, Syrian National Army or whatever, the green stripes with the green stars and the red. And she said, this is the flag over Damascus. I said, no, it's not. This is the flag that's flying over there. And I said, but what is that flag? I mean, you didn't make up that flag. That's the flag of French colonial Syria imposed on you by the West that bought you. See, she won't admit it. She won't admit that she took the dime, the Western dime, and the Western training. She may have thought she was digital democracy. They created these little community groups throughout Syria where they gave them cameras and they gave them satellite phones. They gave them access, taught them how to access the internet. Then their job was to go in and film things and then put it straight on the internet so that the Western media could take clips of it and create the perception of a massive unrest, massive result. And so then they get upset when the Syrian Secret Service comes in and says, yeah, you're working for the CIA, you're working for British intelligence, Dutch intelligence, we're shutting you down, we're putting you in jail. Assad is terrorizing us. Assad is brutalized. Well, you took the CIA's money. I didn't know it was CIA. Well, that's how the CIA works, guys. They don't come in and say, remember Jared Cohen? Digital democracy. And the old CIA going, thank you very much, boy. Just digital democracy. We're going to take that one. We're going to run with it. And they ran with it in Syria with all the people went, we're just doing digital democracy. No, you're doing regime change. You know you're doing regime change. You're trying to overthrow Bashar al-Assad. Now, you may think that's a good idea. I may think that's a good idea, although I didn't. I'm saying, but it doesn't matter. From Assad's perspective, it's not a good idea. It's illegal. and
Yeah,
they
it's
will
over.
come at you with the tools of repression. So all these people out there saying that I was innocent, there were no innocents in Syria. You're either with the government or you were against the government. There's no innocence. There were sides fighting, and when you're having this kind of fighting, it's an existential struggle, and
Mhm.
bad things happen. I'm not defending what happened. I'm just putting it in perspective. When they say we were innocent, we were this, they put out this story of this guy in Deir al-Zor. I can't remember his name, but he was
Al-Jilani.
arrested.
You mean Jelani, the one
No,
who
Jelani's the head chopper. I'm talking about
right.
this. He's a Western educated activist who was arrested, imprisoned, tortured,
Oh,
and they kept showing his gaunt body, and then he ended up dying. Um, the guy may have been an honorable man. I
mhm.
think he was. He may have believed in what he was doing. I think he did. He wanted democracy. I believe he did. I'm not saying anything bad about this guy. Shouldn't have died this way. But you picked a side and you lost. And so he's not innocent. I just don't want to hear the term innocent. Please don't disgrace him that way. He's not innocent. He was fighting for what he believed in. He got captured by a regime that uses brutal tools of repression, and he died. But he's not innocent. There's no innocence here. I don't want to hear innocence. And if you're an activist who takes CIA money, whether it's directly or indirectly, understand it, you're not in control of what you're doing. That's the other thing I try to tell all these Syrian nationalists who've come out and yay, you're not in control. You may think you're in control, but there's somebody else doing this not because they like you, not because they believe in your cause, but because they're using you as a tool to achieve a broader geopolitical purpose, which is to bring down Bashar al-Assad to promote whatever other agenda is behind that. And so you have this, this uprising begins. People say it's a popular. There's nothing popular about that uprising. I've
No.
studied that uprising to the T. You have Turks coming in. You have the CIA setting up operations. They're pouring weapons out of Libya, sending it through Turkey, pouring billions of dollars of weapons, pouring it in there, money coming in from all the Gulf Arab states. And next thing you know, you have a free Syrian army. You have, al-Nusra, you have al-Qaeda, and
Mhm.
later on you get ISIS. You get all these things happening down in Dara. Uh, none of it is
Natural.
natural. All of it
Yeah.
is imposed. Some of it might have started as natural intent. But again, if I wake up one day and say I'm going to run for office, okay, that's a natural. I'm going to oppose the superintendent down in Bethlehem. That's natural. And I start campaigning. And then the mafia comes up to me and says, "Hey, Scott, yeah, need some money, right? I saw you having trouble getting getting those advertisements out there. Yeah, I'm having trouble. Here's some money. But now, okay, but now we need you to do this. I'm no longer in control. What might have started out as innocent is now I am now controlled by the people providing me money, guidance, etc. So all of this is controlled opposition. All of it. And much of it is controlled not by domestic interests, but by outside interests. You can't call what happened in Syria a civil war. A civil war is where people rise up from within and fight one another. What this was foreign controlled opposition to overthrow Bashar al Assad, and it almost worked. Now, Assad is still struggling with the corruption. There's so what happened here is that the corrupt people were fighting for their lives, and the Syrian army was fighting for its life. But the Syrian army wasn't perfect because there's a problem here. Even though these are foreign controlled opposition, the people in the middle are Syrians caught up in the fighting. And no army likes to fire weapons at its people, at its families, at the relatives of families. And so, no matter how much the generals and the corrupt governors and the corrupt officials who are all have their little economic fiefdoms, remember, Syria is not functioning as a normal, viable Western style society. You have Bashar al Assad, who didn't want to be there, but now is there, trying to get control over this corrupt regime and do reforms, but he can't now. And all those reforms stopped. There is no reform taking place when there is fighting. All the reforms that Bashar al-Assad was trying to bring in stopped. Now they have to fight for their lives, and they're failing. That's the other thing you have to understand. They weren't winning. As much as they fought, by 2014, The money was on the black flags going to fly over Damascus. The Iranians are there fighting because they had they have a history with Hezbollah. Syria supported them, so Iran and Hezbollah are supporting them, but that's not enough. It's not going to turn the tide. And the other problem is you have to be careful about bringing in sort of, I don't like to use the word fanatical, but true believers in the Shia revolution into a primarily Sunni state, especially when the pure believers of the Shia revolution view the Alawites as sort of a heretical offshoot of the Shia faith, and we're not really sure we're on the same side here. But there was this a shrine near Baghdad that the IRGC would come in to defend, and the defense of that shrine turned into, supporting. Then they maintained the resupply route through Syria for Hezbollah. That's how Hezbollah got all their rockets and everything is through this. And so there's this connectivity here, but it's not enough. So Qasem Soleimani, a name everybody should know, head of the Quds Force, the man assassinated by the United States and by President Trump, he flies to Moscow in 2015, and he tells the Russians, "Look, it's over. Syria is going to fall unless you do something." And so the decision was that Russia would intervene with primarily air power. They'd bring in some ground forces. Constitutionally, it's very difficult for Russia to deploy its main armed forces. So that's where Wagner came in. Wagner became a very heavy component of that. But there was, Russian military police. There was Russian generals doing command centers. There were select Russian forces that came in to stiffen up the Syrian army. But the main fighters were brought in from Iran. Iran brought in generals and stuff who worked with the Russians. They had a joint command center. And the generals brought in some IRGC units. But the majority of the fighting was done by IRGC proxies. Militias mobilized in Afghanistan and Iraq came in and they fought. The Iranians lost around 4,000 people between their IRGC and all that fighting. This is heavy fighting. The Russians lost hundreds of people. But they turned the tide. They stabilized the situation. And by 2018, 2019, 2020, they're pushing back, recapturing territory. The Russians are intervening and saying, we're not going to kill all the jihadists. What we want you to do is displace them, move them up to Idlib. So we're going to clear out the countryside, move everything to Idlib, and then this is going to become a Turkish problem. The Turks, meanwhile, are looking at destabilization. They have the empowerment of the Kurds in southeastern part, American forces coming in, the Kurds renaming themselves so they're not terrorists in the eyes of the Americans anymore, but yet they're still encouraging Turkish or Kurdish uprising. So the Turks intervene to stop that. Turks come down to salvage what they're doing, because remember, the Turks had heavily invested in overthrowing Bashar al-Assad. Erdogan went from being his nice older brother to the man saying, you got to go, you're a dictator, you're a brutal dictator, etc. So the Turks are involved. Now that the Russians and the Iranians have intervened, it's Russia and Iran against Turkey. And that's where the Astana process comes in, because the Turks early on shot down a Russian airplane and the Russians went, you don't get to do that. So the Turks came to Astana, and arm twisting, Putin laying the law down for Erdogan, and Erdogan agrees to a series of imperfect ceasefires and agreements that led to, in the end, you remember the Turks had built these fortified positions protecting highways and areas,
right.
And
the M4 highway, I believe.
Use those to have forces sortie out. And the Russians attacked a Turkish column and killed a bunch of Turkish soldiers. And the Turks, and then at that time, the Russians said, you don't get to flex down here. And the final Astana agreement was reached, which was a very bitter pill for the Turks to swallow. So then you have this imposed, stability. The Battle of Aleppo, the Syrian government took it over. It was the Iranians who won Aleppo, backed by the Air Force. There were Syrians fighting, but the Syrian army did go. The Syrian army went from around 300,000 men at that time. It shrunk down to about 170,000.
Oh, wow.
And they weren't able to get it above that. So this in the Syrian army at this time is still run by, you have some generals that are very effective in combat. Like I said, though, in wartime, the rules don't matter. So these generals come in and they're commanding, but they're still corrupt. They're still taking money, putting it in their pockets, building their villas, taking care of their people. You know who's not being taken care of? The average Syrian
Yeah.
soldier, but he's fighting for his country. So now peace breaks out all over. I mean, there was never pure peace, but it breaks out. And the corrupt people go back to being corrupt. The generals are corrupt, and they have a lot of catching up to do because they had fought from 2011 up until 2018. The Russians come in, take a look at this, and they say, "Hey, Bashar, you gotta change this. Your military is dysfunctional. Every time ISIS started to sortie out and take Palmyra, your guys ran. We had to come in and recapture it. We, the Russians, had to come in and recapture it. It's time that you learn to hold things and you learn how to recapture things. You've got to reform your entire military." But the problem is, to reform the military, you have to get rid of the corrupt generals and put in actual generals. And the corrupt generals are the ones who saved Bashar al-Assad. They're the ones during the fighting are sitting down with Assad, having dinner, having lunch, talking, bonding. And Assad's like, "No, these are the guys that saved me. These are the guys that saved me. I can't. No. I'm not going to do that. These guys are telling me everything's okay." And they won. Well, Bashar, they didn't win without us. Yes, but that's okay. We're good. We don't need reforms. And the Russians like, "You really do need reforms." And he turned down the reforms. The Iranians are coming in and saying similar things. And then the Iranians went to the Russians and said, "All right, if they're not going to reform, we have to double down. We got to bring in more Iranian troops. We got to bring in and all that." And the Russians went, "You can't do that. We have an agreement with Israel that we're not going to let the problems in Syria turn Syria into an Iranian base.
Right.
Thank you for your help, but you guys don't get to come in and bring in divisions and all this stuff. You got to stay out." And that created some tension between Russia and Iran. So you got the Russians telling the Syrians to reform. You got the Iranians who recognize the Syrians aren't reforming, therefore they need reinforcement. And neither one of those things are happening because Bashar al-Assad has been lulled into a false sense of complacency and complicity that everything's fine. So now you have a situation. Here's the final thing. The West is conspiring. Remember, the West isn't just because they got beat. Turkey is pouring funding into the HTS.
Yeah,
these
they didn't stop.
branded
Right.
Al-Qaeda people. The new Syrian or the Free Syrian Army, which is another faction there, the West is pouring money in. And the CIA is still running around. Guys, the CIA never sleeps. Please understand that. That these alcoholic case officers are out there drinking their whiskey and how do we get these boys? How do we get these boys? What are we going to do? Where's their weakness? What's going on? How are we getting there? And suddenly Bashar goes, "I want to be reformed in the eyes of the Arab League."
Right.
And Bashar goes, I want to get back. And the CIA is going, "Oh, I like this. This boy needs some money. He needs some investment." And then they go and talk to their buddies in Saudi Arabia and Oman. They go, "He's going to come to you and he's going to ask you for a lot of money, and you're going to give it to him. But you're going to give him to this person, this person, and this person, and this person, because I've been making the phone calls and saying, hey, you're going to get a lot of money, a whole bunch of money, and we need you to come over to the dark side." And I'm absolutely positive, I can't prove this, but I'm positive that many of these corrupt people, these governors, these were receiving money, this new influx of money, and corruption is absolute. Here's the other problem too. The United States sanctions Syria.
Yes.
All right. Now, people can do a lot during wartime. People tighten belts. People make sacrifices. But in times of peace, they want things to go back to being normal. They want things to be rebuilt. And there was the facade of reconstruction. Aleppo got rebuilt. Damascus got rebuilt. Cafeterias happened and all this kind of stuff. But that's fake. That's a veneer. Underneath it is corruption. And the sanctions create more corruption because the first thing that happens in a sanctioned economy is you get a black market economy. And that is the antithesis. And who's running the black market? The generals, they are the mafia, and they're running the black market. And so nothing's happening. They're just getting richer and richer. And the soldier who just went through all this fighting, all these dead soldiers, all these wounded soldiers with no legs, no arms coming back, they're not getting the care they need. There's a lot of resentment happening right now.
Yeah.
Because corruption goes downhill. I mean, you may be a captain who says, I'm not corrupt, I believe in my men. But then you go home and your wife says, the kids are hungry, honey. Did you get paid last month?
Yeah.
Paid, honey, but just hold on a little bit longer. The money's going to come. And then you go visit the colonel and ask where the money is. And the colonel's sitting there drinking wine and eating. He's fat and he's surrounded by, women and song and dance. And he says, "Sir, where's the money for the men and me? You'll get paid. Get out of here." And they leave. And I think the Syrian army just stopped believing in the reforms that the Russians said were needed. And the thing is, this is happening. So I can put a uniform on a soldier. I can give him the kit. I can give him the weapon. And he looks like a soldier. And with the new kit, people will look at him and say, "Hey, he's got that Russian style helmet and all that. And he looks like those Russians that are fighting like animals." I mean, they're and I don't mean that bad. I mean, like,
I know what you mean. Yeah, I know what you mean.
So he must be an animal too. He must be a warrior because he looks like a warrior. But inside is the heart of a warrior. Inside is the heart of a conscript who says, "What am I doing here?
Yeah.
These, I don't believe in this corruption. I don't believe in this. I don't want to be here." So they're there. It's a veneer. Now HTS is out there being funded by the Turks. I believe if you study the battle for Idlib, one of the final battles was because HTS was refusing to abide by the conditions imposed on Syria, on Turkey through Astana. The Russians and the Syrians, launched an offensive that drove them out of. There's supposed to be a highway that's supposed to be patrolled by the Russians and the Turks and all that. And the HTS was fighting. So they came in and they pushed them out, and the Russians took control of the highway, and the Syrian army took control of the highway. That was seen as a strategic defeat for HTS, and then the war. So HTS started this offensive simply to recapture the highway. That's it.
And just kept going when they realized that they weren't getting up.
And they came in, they were expecting some fighting. They come in and they go, "Well, that was easy. Let's keep going." And so they kept going. They said, and they got guys, they got sleeper cells in there, and the sleeper cells rise up in Aleppo and go, "There ain't nothing here." So they come into Aleppo, and Aleppo falls. And they're like, "Well, keep going." And they keep going. And all those guys that looked like animals said, we're not doing this again. We're not doing what we did before. We're not going to repeat the sacrifice that we made, because the sacrifice we made was supposed to free Syria, but instead it created this fiefdom of corruption, and we're just not going to fight for that anymore. And they threw down their there it is. They threw down their guns, their uniform, and they just walked away. They just said, "No, we're not going to do this." And this is what happened. And then it's opportunism. The Syrian National Army didn't participate in the initial attacks because there was some infighting between them and HTS. But then the Syrian National Army went, whoa, we can't let them go and grab all the stuff. So they start coming down. So now you got movement taking place. And down in Jordan, this thing called the Southern Operations Center, which was the rebels, or the foreign-backed rebels that had been pushed out of Dara. They go, "Why don't we try this?" And they come in, and instead of getting a hail of gunfire and all that, nothing. They come in, nothing. And next thing you know, it's done. Black flag over Damascus. Assad has flown out. Nobody predicted this. When I first started, I thought, I bought into a narrative that said that this was part of a. Now, I will say this: there's no doubt that there's Turkish money, Turkish training, CIA money, CIA training. The Ukrainians were in there training them about drones and all this stuff. But I bought into the notion because, forgive me, guy. There's a lot of people out there. Ritter owes us an apology. I'm not going to apologize, man. I was wrong.
I saw that.
You got it wrong, but I'll tell you why I got it wrong.
Nobody predicted this. Nobody saw this.
170,000 soldiers. And I come from a Marine Corps background. I mean, I'm going to fight. And I just thought they'd fight. I thought what I wrote early on is I said they've withdrawn to regroup, but the Russians will come in with the Air Force. The Iranians will come in with their, and they're going to repeat what happened before.
Right.
In 2015. Solidify, and then they'll push it back. There was no reason for me not to believe that was going to happen, because that's past precedent. They have 170,000 soldiers who haven't been fighting hard for a couple of years, so they should be regrouped, refreshed, etc. What I didn't realize, nobody realized, is that the soldiers weren't going to do it again. They weren't going to go through that again because they lost faith in everything. This
Yeah.
corruption was so manifest, so insipid, so utterly, it had reached its tendrils into everything. And nobody, because Bashar al-Assad, I tell you what, he gives a great interview. He gives a great interview. And he can walk around parts of Damascus and be treated like a hero. He can walk around. What it turns out is that this was all carefully controlled state propaganda. Now, we knew it was state propaganda to begin with. I mean, nobody's dumb enough, but the confidence that he exuded, the words he used, people like me watched it and went, all right, I think this guy's going to try and be the reformer he's promised to be.
Yeah.
What none of us, and even the people who lived in Syria, I mean, Vanessa Beeley lives in Syria.
Oh, man.
And Vanessa
she didn't know. I mean, I spoke to her when this was happening, and she was like, no, there's going to be a deal. Everything is going to be fine. And then 2 days later, it's over with.
But my question, Vanessa, is didn't you see the corruption? You lived there.
Yeah.
I mean, you lived there. I mean, as an analyst, I can't forgive myself. My job is to see these things. I didn't.
Yeah,
maybe I was blinded. I was blinded by this, but she lived there. So many people, so many of these analysts lived there and worked there. Didn't they see the corruption? Didn't they see the problems? Didn't they see the indifference? Because there has to be, because it isn't just that the Syrian army quit. I'm here to tell you right now, I'm a civilian nowadays, but black flag jihadists rolling to Delmar, I am grabbing a knife. I'm ambushing the first one I find, taking his weapons, and I'm killing the next one I find, and I'm arming my neighbors, and we're forming a Delmar Self-Defense Association. And if the army's not going to defend us, we're going to defend us because this is my family. The nation quit. Everybody quit.
Well, Scott, nobody. Real quick, because we have about 2 minutes left, and I want to get this question in. Is this going to devolve into something like Libya? That is my biggest fear. When I saw Iraq, Libya, and then this happens, and it was like, Iraq, initially Bush says everything's great, the war is over with, and then it goes to shit in a heartbeat. Do you expect, we have about 2 minutes left, do you expect the same thing to happen to Syria?
It's already happened. Jolani didn't. I'll tell you why I know that this outcome wasn't planned, because nobody would put Jolani in charge. Nobody would put an Al-Qaeda head chopper in charge. Nobody would put that in charge. There would be a government in exile. The Syrian National Army had a government in exile. They would have been prepped. They would have been ready. They would have had their suits on and their ties on. And the Turks would have driven them in and said, "You're in charge." They're still on vacation wherever they were because they're corrupt too. Everything's corrupt. And they haven't organized. Jolani comes in and says, "I'm in charge." And now what he's done is he said, the transitional government will be my fellow head choppers. I'm bringing in my fellow head choppers up there in Idlib. They're coming in. There will be civil war. There will be violence. Look at Israel. They're having a field day right now, just blowing everything up because they have to. From the Israeli perspective, yay, Assad's gone, but he had a whole bunch of Scud missiles. We're not going to let these head chopping idiots have Scud missiles. So they're blowing those up. They're blowing up. He has tanks. They're blowing up all this so that there's no situation like Libya where a whole bunch of weaponry suddenly falls in the hands of people. But that weaponry already has fallen in the hands of people. This is going to be a disaster for decades. And every one of these Syrian patriots that are cheering in the streets of Europe and in the streets of Damascus, mark my words, in 3 years, you'll be crying. There's a man, it's an interview that's going around, a man who tore down the statue of Saddam Hussein when Baghdad fell. And today he said, "I wish I hadn't done that. I wish Saddam Hussein had stayed in power." The Libyans dream about the time of Gaddafi because back then, peace, prosperity, everything. Bashar al-Assad isn't a Gaddafi. He isn't a Saddam Hussein. He was an accidental president who failed to live up to what he wanted to do. And maybe he needed to go. But the way he went here, this is just going to destroy Syria, cause it to fracture apart. And I think Syria's going to get carved up too. That's the other thing. If you think the Turks are walking away from Aleppo, you don't know anything about the Ottoman Empire, the transition from the Ottoman Empire to the Turkish Republic, and how angry the Turks are that Aleppo was given to Syria. To them, Aleppo, the vilayet of Aleppo, is a Turkish vilayet. And watch this: Iraq, Turks are coming after Mosul because that's the other historical issue they have out there. So this is transforming the region. It's a whole new game. Yeah.
One last question. It's something you said about CNN. CNN interviewed Jelani, and they basically interviewing a terrorist and softball the fact that the man was a head chopping terrorist. You pointed out that you were in the room as they were setting up, I guess, propaganda exercises like that. Could you go into that? We have about 1 or 2 minutes before the next guest comes on, but please go into that.
No, just in 2002, I was invited to the headquarters of CNN in Atlanta. I had just come back from Iraq, where I spoke to the parliament, and also had just, I had been advocating for the return of weapons inspectors, and then, Saddam Hussein said we're going to let weapons inspectors back in, and I take credit for at least playing a part in putting that thought in the minds of the Iraqi government and helping convince them it's the right thing to do. So CNN, after attacking me, brought me in and had a big panel who interviewed me and all that. And the CEO and the director of their news operations stands up and goes, "Scott Ritter is cleared now. He can go on. He's passed the purity test." And then he takes me and he goes, "Let me show you what we're doing here." And he takes me in, he shows me the war room. And we're talking October 2002. The war room. Already hotlines to the Pentagon, already reporters getting trained and prepared to be embedded in invasion forces. CNN is getting ready to be the propaganda arm of the Defense Department as they go into an Iraqi invasion that hadn't been approved yet. Hadn't been officially approved. The president was still saying we're working for peace, but CNN already knows what the outcome is going to be. They're preferred. I was also working with CNN, or when the CIA brought CNN in when I was a weapons inspector, to create a propaganda film about the weapons inspections. CNN and the CIA are the same. And this interview that was done, handpicked reporter, script, and the CIA said you have to go in and you got to make Jelani look good.
Wow.
And CNN went in there and did what they had to do. This ridiculous interview. But CNN's not a news organization. CNN is state-controlled, not state-controlled, CIA-controlled media. 100%.
Propaganda outlet. Scott Ritter, former UN weapons inspector of mass destruction, whistleblower. Scott, man, always appreciate you, Scott. You can find Scott on Telegram at Scott Ritter. Thank you for this, Scott. I really do appreciate it. Thank you for the context.
Thanks for having me come on. Good luck.
Absolutely. All right. I want to go to my next guest. We are joined with another fantastic guest. We're joined with Caleb Maupin. He's a speaker, writer, journalist, political analyst, and author. His book, Kamala Harris and the Future of America, an essay in 3 parts, examines the life of Kamala Harris and puts her rise to prominence in the context of a changing U.S. political discourse on the geopolitical stage. Caleb, my man, welcome to the show, man. How you doing today?
I'm good. How about yourself?
I am doing good. I am doing better than what is taking place in Syria right now. I can't say astonished, but all of the people who are, a few years ago, oh my God, I can't believe ISIS is killing and chopping off these heads, to now, oh my God, we're excited that an Al-Qaeda terrorist is now taking control of Syria. It's astonishing to me, whether it was the interview on CNN of Jelani whitewashing his crimes, acting like he's a diversity-friendly jihadist, or the way that the local community in Syria, especially the minorities, have just been fundamentally ignored. They're acting like this is quote unquote democracy, or that this was a popular uprising. It was nothing of the such. Give me your take on the events that have taken place over the last couple of weeks. And are you surprised on how fast all of this has collapsed?
Well, I'm certainly surprised. The timing raises a lot of questions. It's clear the military was told to stand down. It wasn't like a military defeat. This is almost comparable to how Afghanistan, was taken by the Taliban. It was kind of a handoff that happened. And we'll understand the details of it more in the coming weeks. But I mean, we really shouldn't be surprised. How many years has it been since 2011, right? That's when the USA began funding extremists. How many billions and billions and billions of US taxpayer money has been poured into this? How many foreign fighters have been trained? I mean, if you throw that much at a country, year after year after year, eventually, yes, you can topple the government. I mean, it's possible, if you put Mike Tyson in a ring with a 5-year-old, he will eventually win the fight. I mean, what we should be surprised that the Syrian Arab Republic was able to hold out this long, right? We saw that Iraq, was invaded, quickly fell. We saw Libya and how it fell in 2011. Syria held out for quite a long time due to the support they received from Iran and from Russia. But it didn't last forever. And the Syrian president is in Russia at this time, and we will see what happens next. But I did ask John Kirby 8 years ago at the U.S. State Department when I was reporting there for RT about the fate of the Syrian Christians and what would happen to them. And he just kind of dismissed it when I asked him about it. He said, "Oh, that's a hypothetical." Well, now
I have that clip, actually.
Yeah.
I want to play this clip because you're right. Because as I pointed out, they don't seem to care all that much about the minority populations in Syria. This is John Kirby.
Wouldn't the
violent toppling of the Syrian government directly benefit ISIS?
The toppling of the Assad government benefit ISIS?
That would be directly to the benefit of ISIS.
I'm not going to speculate about what would or what wouldn't benefit Daesh. I mean, to some degree, and the secretary's talked about this, there's a symbiosis between the Assad regime and Daesh. And he said that many, many times. It is through Assad's brutality that Daesh has been able to fester and grow into ungoverned spaces. And one of the things that we've talked about routinely, although we haven't said it, we haven't talked about it recently, is that we understand that while the future of Syria cannot include Bashar al-Assad, as we work through this political process to a transitional governing body, we recognize that some institutions of government, for instance, the security forces, in some form or fashion, has got to stay intact, so that there isn't a complete collapse of an appropriate governing infrastructure inside the country as we work through this very difficult transitional process.
If the Syrian government were to just immediately fall, what would happen to Syrian Christians? What would happen to Syrian Alawites?
Look, I'm not going to engage in hypotheticals about a situation that we're actually obviously trying to avoid. It isn't about the fall of the regime. We are trying to get to a transitional process of governance that preserves even some of the existing infrastructure going forward, but that at the end of that process gets us to a government that is put in place by the Syrian people with their voices being heard, and it doesn't include Bashar al-Assad.
You know what's wild about that? He said it's not about the fall. It's not about the fall. It's not about the people who are going to be killed. It's not about the people going around chopping heads or whatever. It's not about the Christians or the minorities. I'm like, it's not about any of that. It's about transitioning into something else. I mean, that statement is mind-blowing considering he's yada-yadaing a lot of miserable stuff that's going to take place as a result of this government fundamentally collapsing and people being at the edge of a knife. I mean, in real terms. Give me a take on that. I mean, you asked them that question. Now that we are here in this process, what are your thoughts?
Well, I'm thinking of the words recently that we heard from the German political leader, Sarah Wagenknecht, and she said that the Syrians living in Germany, the refugees who are now celebrating the fall of Assad, they should all immediately return to Syria, because they are happy about the results of the overthrow of the government. They should all go back to Syria and live there. I don't think they're going to be doing that. If you look at the conditions in the country, I don't think it's the ideal place for one to be. But the people in the streets of Germany that are marching around supporting this, they should now go back, and they have worked to overthrow the Syrian government. They should go live under the results. I mean, it's not a good situation in the country, and that we can just add this to our checklist. I mean, I don't want to be the "I told you so" guy. I really don't want to be that. I mean, I really wish that the Syrian Arab Republic were still intact, but we can now put this on our list. Like, they said that overthrowing Saddam Hussein was going to bring a chance at democracy to the Iraqi people. I think it was called The Birth Pangs of a New Middle East by Condoleezza Rice. Look at Iraq right now. The overthrow of Gaddafi was supposed to bring stability and peace to Libya. Well, look at Libya right now. There are many, many examples of places where the United States has intervened and said it has to bring a better life to the people by doing it. It doesn't work out that way. And I'm pretty sure Syria is not going to do pretty well. It's not going to be a great outcome for the Syrian people, all that the United States has spent on destabilizing the country. For 20 years, the USA occupied Afghanistan, and it was 20 years of instability. And things have actually only really improved since the forces the USA was fighting, the Taliban, have reassumed control of the country. As bad as the Taliban might be, things have actually gotten a little bit better in the country since the Taliban has been in power. And 20 years of the USA overthrowing the Taliban and occupying the country, and it was 20 years of instability. So, I mean, this is yet another example of U.S. regime change wars not benefiting the people they're supposed to benefit. And I guess I get frustrated. There's that old song, "We Won't Get Fooled Again," but they have the same playbook, right? That there's some leader around the world we're told is just so brutal and so horrendous, and that some people might be isolationists, but have a heart, Caleb. You got to stop Gaddafi from killing his own people. You got to stop Saddam from murdering his own people. The Pentagon has just got to be the humanitarian organization to rescue the people. And then look at the results. And usually the things that we're told are not true, right? The chemical weapons stuff about Syria was not true. The stuff about Gaddafi handing out Viagra to his soldiers was not true. Saddam Hussein's weapons of mass destruction was not true. And the people are always worse off as a result. And we get lied to until the next time around, once again, they're manufacturing a war scenario once again. And I get frustrated with all the people who seem to fall for it every time. That afterwards, if you confront them, they'll admit you're right. Okay, sure. But then the next regime change operation, they jump on the same bandwagon. It's frustrating to see the same thing play out over and over and over again.
But do you think it's that they actually believe it, or they just don't care? Like, all things being equal, I get the sense that what Kirby is talking about is, like he said, it's not about the transition. It's about what happens next, where we can put in our own puppet, or we can put in a regime that we can work with, as opposed to Bashar al-Assad. I mean, I get the sense that whether it's Iraq, whether it's Libya, the instability was the point. Not, meaning the thought was we need to destroy any notion of this kind of front against either the US, or for that matter, Israel, or in this case, both. And whatever, even if it's chaos, that chaos is better than having a leader in that position that is against our interests. I mean, is it that? Like, under the model that you're putting out as if they just go along with it because they believe it. From my point of view, they don't care. Their thought is we need to get rid of these people because these people are against our interests. But give me your take on that.
Well, I'm referring more to ordinary people who fall for it, not the government itself. But I think we should also talk about this, because a lot of people will say the USA failed in Iraq or failed in Libya because they didn't produce stability. I don't agree with that. I agree with what you're saying. And that instability is the goal, that Iraq was a competitor with the United States. They took control of their oil resources. They have a huge amount of oil, and they sold oil on the international markets in competition with ExxonMobil, BP, Shell, and Chevron. And they used that oil money to fund Palestinian resistance, etc. And now Iraq has been blown to bits, and they export roughly 10% of the oil they once exported. And they're in chaos, and they're not a competitor anymore. And I think you can say the same for Libya. Libya used to be the top oil exporting country on the African continent. And they, had a huge amount of oil, and they had the highest life expectancy as a result. And they had built the world's largest irrigation system. And now Libya has been blown to bits, and its exports are 11 to 12% of what it once was. And they're not a competitor any longer. And yes, instability is definitely the end goal, I think, for the forces that are in power in the world. I think that is, yes, they don't want competition. They don't want, solid opposition. They want just chaos. I think about when the Roman Empire defeated Carthage. The story goes that they took sea salt and they ground it into the soil. to make sure that no crops could grow once again in Carthage. That's, ancient Tunisia. And the idea was they wanted to make sure they didn't have any opponent that could emerge. They made sure they couldn't grow any crops. They put salt into the soil, and that prevented them from reemerging. And you can argue that's a similar thing. And especially after the U.S. invasion of Iraq, there was a big effort to destroy the sense of an Iraqi national identity, to divide the population between Kurds and Sunnis and Shias, and really emphasize that you are now your ethnic group, and play them against each other, make sure that no solid Iraqi national identity could once again emerge that could be the basis of solid opposition. We look at Syria, it's always been a sectarian religious conflict. I mean, they've really been emphasizing the sectarian religious aspects of it. So I think that's the situation we're in.
Well, I guess the question is, what happens now? I mean, I guess my expectation is it's going to devolve into something like Libya and Iraq. How do you view this? And I guess this leads to the secondary question of what does this mean on a geopolitical stage? Like, Israel has already invaded at this point, and they seem to be carving up Syria. I mean, they are 20 kilometers from Damascus. They have apparently taken the highest point in Syria. Smotrich has come out saying we need to go all the way to Damascus, basically, effectively take Damascus. Turkey, I mean, these people were clearly backed by Turkey, the U.S. intelligence, and Israel. I would imagine Turkey may actually go into it themselves, especially with the notion of the Kurds. And I would imagine this group that is backed by Turkey, from my understanding, the reports on the ground that they are moving towards the Kurds. So there's going to be this expectation of a fight between Kurdish forces backed by the U.S. and these other forces backed by Turkey. What do you think this, and give me your take on that. Like, how does this shake out in a geopolitical sense moving forward?
Well, there's been a lot of speculation that the forces that are now in power also reached some kind of arrangement with Russia and Iran. The way that there was some kind of agreement, the fact that it wasn't just an epic battle that went on and on and on for Damascus, that there was kind of a standing down, means that some kind of agreement was also reached with the forces that had been backing the Syrian government. Now, I can't confirm that. And I will say, I urge people to really watch out. On Saturday night, I was live streaming and I saw in the chat, everyone saying, oh my God, what's happening in Damascus? And I saw everyone's posting, oh my God, Bashar Assad died in a helicopter crash. He's dead. That was fake news. That wasn't true. And people kept asking me to comment. And I said, I will comment when I see the final results, when I get the final picture. Yeah, I'll comment, but I'm not going to comment now. I'm not just going to react. And now I continue to see a lot of people speculating, well, Russia did this or Iran did this. And you don't know what's going on there. And keep in mind that the forces of empire are very good at disinformation, and they very much want to sow disunity among the people that were on the opposite side in Syria, and that we need to wait and get the details and get the facts, and that people don't realize that, our own reaction to these things, especially in the age of social media, and the way we analyze and present things can have an impact on how events play out. And so it's important to get the whole story before you just start, repeating things. And like all the people that were repeating that Bashar Assad was dead, that wasn't true. And that was put out there for a reason. That served a propaganda purpose. They were trying to embolden the forces that were taking Damascus. And so the idea that the leader of Syria was no longer alive would have emboldened those forces. Well, I made a point of telling people, look, we don't know. That's not confirmed yet. I'm not ready to share that. Turned out it wasn't true. And I really do urge people to slow down with these events. We all do want to be ahead, right? Especially in the news world. You want to know something before other people know things. You want to look like somebody who knows things, but especially in our day and age, you don't know. And I do feel like people on our side, I will say, people in the alternative media world, people that are anti-imperialist, there's a little bit too much of an anxiousness to embrace bad news, I will say. I encourage optimism. I encourage people to look for the best outcome. And I feel like there's kind of a mindset among a lot of people on our side who see themselves as, they almost expect the worst, and they almost expect to lose and they almost expect that things won't go their way. And, you know, if you expect bad things from the world, you'll get it. I mean, that's kind of how things work. And I encourage people to have a much more optimistic outlook and not just jump immediately to embrace bad news. And on top of that, be more willing to see the good in different places. You know, I see so many people that are announcing, oh, Trump, he's just like all the others. Well, you know, there's Tulsi Gabbard, there's Matt Gaetz going to be investigating the FBI, there's Kash Patel. I mean, maybe Trump won't do a single good thing he promised to do. Maybe he will just disappoint us all. But let's give him a chance to do something good, and let's try to emphasize and push any good that he might potentially do. And I just, again, I see people way too willing to just kind of announce it's over, we're doomed. And I just don't think that's the best way to operate. That's why I haven't really streamed a reaction to the fall of the Syrian government, because I thought, well, what can I say that's going to make things better? I mean, I'm obviously horrified by what's happening there. I'm heartbroken about what's happening. I'm somebody who's really opposed what's happening there and tried to raise the dangers of the Syrian government falling. The Syrian government has fallen. Not good, not a good situation. But yeah, what can we do about it? I mean, we have to assess the current situation and figure out how we can move on.
I guess my feeling was, I got to be honest, I wasn't looking for bad news in this. I was more shocked than anything else. Yeah. My assumption was that the Syrian military was going to fight in the same way that it fought back in 2015. That Bashar al-Assad held on like grim death, not necessarily wanting to give up power. And the Syrian military fought with them, with the Russian military and Iranian military, pushing back the terrorists, the Idlib. I kind of assumed that something similar was going to happen this time around. I guess, to be fair, I think what people are feeling is this just shock. Like, the people who are the anti-imperialists who are looking at this stuff are just confused by what is taking place. Meaning, I think they accept, okay, well, the U.S. is after Syria, and they've been going all the way back since the Bush era of trying to go after Syria with this idea of going towards Iran. I think those people are aware of Wesley Clark saying that country after country after country is going to be taken down. I think he said 7 countries in 5 years. Ending in Iran, they see Syria fall. And so from their point of view, Iran is down in crosshairs. I think, to your point, I get it. I understand what you're saying. I think they're looking at this as a domino to fall with this notion of more chaos in the Middle East. And I think they have all sorts of questions associated with it, even though I do take your point, like not necessarily looking for the worst outcome in this stuff. Fair enough. I think they are probably processing what is taking place, and they're looking at they're looking at Iraq, they're looking at Libya, and now they see Syria fall, and they're probably thinking to themselves, oh my God, this is going to be the same thing that happens to Syria. So I take your point. I do take your point. To be fair, I never really reported that Assad was dead. I didn't report anything on that. Sure. A lot of fake news was coming out around a lot of the stuff. And I do remember at the time the Syrian government putting out stuff saying, no, Assad is still in Damascus. We're still fighting. All of that stuff was wrong. They weren't really fighting, per se. There might have been pockets, but all things been equal. Also, that meeting in Doha, I think people were thinking, okay, well, something is going to happen for this that's going to somehow stabilize the events on the ground. Lavrov was pissed off at the end of that meeting, which means that the Russians felt like they were stabbed in the back by either Erdogan or probably Erdogan more than anything else. I would imagine the Astana agreements, they thought that this level was somewhat stabilized, even though there were reports. Look, I would tell you this. I spoke to Kevork. I can't remember his last name, but he runs Syria analysis. And he was pointing out how in the Telegram channels, it was being talked about. The people were bragging about it, and yet there didn't seem to be a reaction from the Assad government about it, even from the standpoint of Iran and Russia telling them, look, you need to make adjustments, you need to make changes, this stuff is going on. And his government didn't seem to respond to any of the warnings that he was getting in all of this. I mean, and I know you can't necessarily get into the head of the people involved. Why do you think he was slow to respond? Why do you think he didn't seem to have this level of fight that was in him the last time around. What do you think the difference was between 2015 and now? If that makes sense, if the question makes sense.
Well, I think we're going to learn in the future. I mean, this is one of those situations where we have to wait for the whole story to come out, right? I mean, we learned a lot more about the U.S. handover of Afghanistan and how that went down afterwards. You know, we learn these things in the aftermath. I think things will probably become clear in the next year or two, all the details about how this happened. And I don't want to speculate because I know there's a lot of extreme emotions, especially among Syrians, about this situation. And I don't want to say anything that could add to anything that might manipulate those emotions to divide the anti-imperialist forces or whatnot. And I guess we'll get the whole story at some point. We'll find out how this happened. I mean, it does appear that there was some decision to stand down. I mean, it was not simply that the military just didn't fight. There was a decision from high up that we're going to let this happen. Why that decision was made, how that was reached, you know, we'll learn the details of that eventually.
Do you think there's any chance that this shakes out to be an inclusive government in any way at all?
I'm not thinking that's the case right now.
Yeah.
If you look at what's happening in the country, if you look at Israel rolling in, if you look at the chaos, the armed robberies, I don't think that is the case, but never say never. I mean, who knows? Who really knows? I do think it's going to be interesting because the main argument against the incoming National Director of Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, is supposed to be that she is sympathetic to the Syrian government. No, that Syrian government is gone. It doesn't exist anymore. So how are they going to play that card against her? You know, I mean, you know, they'll say, well, she's loyal to this government that doesn't exist anymore. Well, in the past, she had the wrong opinion about something. I mean, okay. I mean, I guess you kind of got an argument there. I mean, that's that in the eyes of people that are just standard purveyors of U.S. foreign policy. Maybe that's an argument against her. One thing I do want to comment on, you know, in relation to this, we were talking before about how people fall for it time and time again and how wars are pitched in this humanitarian way. Right. I will say, you know, my whole life, my whole childhood, my whole teen years, everyone said to me, Caleb, you're going to love college. You're going to love college. College is going to be so amazing. You're a bookish guy and you're going to love college. I hated college. I was not happy at college at all because the reason my relatives and family members were all telling me I was going to love college is because they were from a different generation. And in the past, academics, university, that was where people went to dissent, right? It was the anti-Vietnam War movement had been on the college campuses, and that most of the population had this like support the government, love it or leave it, you know, if you don't like it here, move attitude. But the universities were the place where people learned to think more critically, right? That was kind of the role they played in Cold War America. That role has completely flipped. And now it's the population that is questioning things now, largely. I mean, Trump just won the election, and a lot of people among the population are very angry, and their living standards are going down, and people are questioning why things are happening. And the university is where you go to get vetted, to make sure you're not a dissident, to make sure you can be trusted for a job in that cosmopolitan middle class, you know, in that, you know, and universities are actually places where people think more in line with the establishment than most people among the population do. It's interesting to see how that flip has worked. But the kind of the neocon era, you know, the rise of neoconservatism was this attitude of, yeah, people on the campuses and intellectuals might be disagreeing, but the bulk of the population are just kind of blind believers in the system. And now the universities are where people are blind believers in the system, where you learn to be a blind believer in U.S. foreign policy. You learn to repeat the lies against whatever country is being attacked. You learn the human rights talking points and diversity, equity, and inclusion and all that stuff. And among the population, people are like, my living standards are going down. I don't trust the government. I'm questioning things. And that's one thing that I think is worth pointing out, that we have kind of a new setup in the way dissent is being managed in the United States. Universities, college campuses, et cetera, are ground zero for all the regime change wars. And they're also the places where people are taught that, you know, certain things are conspiracy theories. And I always tell people, I mean, I am so tired of arguing with people where they can't refute what you're saying. You know, the facts are the facts. They can't refute that, but they argue against you based on well, you sound like somebody who might be repeating Russian propaganda, or this sounds like
Yes.
something that Russia might say. Is it true or not? Or this sounds like something a Trump supporter might say. Okay, but is it true or is it not?
Why
Or
do
this,
you think that
this
changed?
sounds like a conspiracy theory. Is it true or is it not? I mean, and that's the way they train people to argue in college. There's certain sets of bad people you're not supposed to sound like: Russian propagandists,
Yeah.
conspiracy theorists, Trump supporters. And if you sound like those people, you're not going to get a promotion in this cosmopolitan middle class world. So you get vetted, and that's what the universities have become.
Why do you think it flipped like that? I mean, because you're right, that wasn't always the case. I mean, initially it was, and I'm blaming the left on this because this seems to be more of a left thing. Why do you think that happened? I mean, in the old days, you had people like Noam Chomsky, the First Amendment is for people to say things that the rest of the people, the very point of the First Amendment is to protect speech that you don't particularly like. Nobody needs to protect speech that everybody likes. You used to get lefties who used to dissent, like even Martin Luther King, for God's sake. I mean, like, people forget he was a socialist. On top of that, I mean, they even carved that aspect of who he is out of it and just break it all the way down to civil rights. How do you think it got to be that way? If you listen to, for example, the Democratic Party today, the Democratic Party, they associate this notion of being left with diversity. And I don't mean diversity in a negative sense. I mean it in the sense where you're carving up nationalities as if these things are very different from each other, despite the fact that all of them have this kind of economic base that everybody cares about the economics of these things. I've noticed that among Democrats, they would say, well, that sounds like Putin, or that sounds like the Syria apologists. And you're right, where I would point out, yeah, but it's true. Like, regardless of who says it, Hitler likes dogs. Okay, so just because you're a dog lover doesn't mean you also like Hitler. That's not really the case. You may say something that just so happens to be a true thing. Just because Putin believes 2 + 2 is 4 doesn't mean it's not 4. It's kind of that assessment. Where do you think that degradation of thought has come from? I mean, do you think that's something that is being pushed by schools or just a liberal thing? I mean, I see this more among liberals than I do among anybody else on the political spectrum.
Well, I think there's been an economic shift since the Cold War. During the Cold War, what held U.S. society together was a very comfortable industrial middle class of auto workers and steel workers and people who worked in good paying industrial jobs who had a very high standard of living. And that kind of bought their loyalty to the American government and the American system, right? And we don't have that anymore. I mean, since the 1980s, especially, and more especially since the 2008 financial meltdown, we just don't have that stable, prosperous industrial middle class we once had. So the people who may have been part of that at one point, who lived a comfortable life, and they're not there, and they're not getting that comfort. The other thing is that I think during the Cold War, the universities kind of played the role almost of like the troubleshooter of U.S. society. Their job was for people that got education, and they were there to kind of point to the problems in U.S. society and fix them, and be kind of the critic who was there to kind of make things better. Whereas now the universities, I think, are a part of the apparatus of maintaining the institutions of U.S. society that do exist, right? It's not like they're there to play the role of the critic. They're more there to kind of vet people for roles in this kind of government bureaucracy, or in the NGO apparatus, or in the kind of institutions that carry out these policies, which are now much more essential. The NGOs, the foundations, et cetera, they are very, very essential in maintaining the situation. So I think that's important as well.
It is weird. It is very bizarre. And that's, like I said, I see this more among liberals than anyone else on the political spectrum, especially with Trump coming into play, where, it's like it's Trump derangement. They don't understand why they lost. Like, all of this stuff comes up where they think, okay, well, the American public is just stupid. The working class has abandoned the Democratic Party, and they don't seem to understand why. Like, they really do seem to be in this kind of bubble of sorts where they can't necessarily figure out why the public is the way that it is. I want to back up something else you said. Trump thing. I have left an open mind for Trump, even with some of these picks that he's made. I am hoping that he fulfilled, at the very least, some of his campaign obligations, such as ending the war, such as being willing to make peace as opposed to war. I mean, the first time around, he was willing to make amends with North Korea. North Korea stopped firing missiles in the Sea of Japan. For me, that was proof of concept that a peace policy could work if indeed the leader of the country went with that particular policy. The country made a decision that they wanted Trump, regardless of what Trump does. He advocated this idea, I'm going to end wars, not start them. It seemed that the public agreed with him on that premise, in which case the public, at the very least on foreign policy, thought he was the better option. You have a event coming up. Please tell the audience about it. I'm going to be at that event with you. I told you I was going to be there. I'm going to be there. Short of me being on a hospital gurney, I will be at that event with you. This is taking place on January at the inauguration of Donald Trump. Explain it to the audience. What is it and why are you coming up with the idea to do so?
Well, January 20th is the day of the inauguration. And so that evening, we're having a reception in Washington, D.C. at Hilton Garden Inn. There'll be nice food there. There'll be different speakers, different music, etc. And it's just a couple blocks from the White House. It's put on by our organization, the Center for Political Innovation. We are hoping that Donald Trump will continue his efforts to bring peace to the Korean Peninsula. We're also proposing that he build a bridge connecting Alaska and Russia, the Peace Bridge. And we've been putting that forward. And we intend to be at the inauguration, doing outreach to the crowds of Trump supporters in the morning. And then that evening, we're having kind of an open house reception at Hilton Garden Inn, just a few blocks from the White House. And we're going to have a nice buffet of food, and you're going to be there among other friends and allies of our organization. And it should just be a nice, fun, relaxing evening to meet other anti-imperialists and to give some perspective to how we can engage with the new administration about trying to bring peace and multipolarity to the world. And so I'm really glad that you're going to be there, Jamal. I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say and meeting you and other people will be joining us. We're figuring out exactly who the other speakers and guests will be, but it seems like it's going to be a quite an event. So we just did the public announcement yesterday. And it's going to be nice. It's going to be good.
No, man, I am looking forward to it. And I think you're right about this. Like, I don't think people should immediately take the perspective that because of the people who Donald Trump putting in office, that immediately means he's going to blow off all of his campaign promises, or for that matter, he's going to abandon what he said over the course of the campaign. I mean, when Donald Trump was having a conversation with Tucker Carlson, Donald Trump was very clear. These wars have not served us. We've spent $10 trillion for what? What have we gotten out of it? We had to pull out of Afghanistan. In many of the other cases, the Middle East has become a basket case, meaning just on fire. Based on our policies, that needs to stop. And so I'm deeply hoping that that's not necessarily something he immediately flips on, that once he gets in office, he said, even after he won, he said, I'm going to fulfill my campaign promises. I'm not going to ignore them. And one of those main ones was peace. I'm going to be a peace candidate, even in Syria. I mean, Donald Trump gets Syria wrong. I mean, he pointed out, he was like, yeah, we shouldn't have anything to do with it, missing the fact we have had something to do with it going all the way back to the Bush administration. But that being said, his instincts in it, the first time around was to pull out, even though he stole the oil. His instincts were to kill Obama's program, was to pull out of Afghanistan, was to make peace with North Korea. Hopefully he continues that. I agree with you. I agree with you 100% on this.
Well, we got to do our best. I mean, we have really no choice. I was on a channel and somebody was critical of what I'm saying about this. And I said, look, what should we do? Right. I mean, somebody just got elected. They promised a lot of good things. They've appointed a lot of people that we're not thrilled about, but there's some other people that maybe are where we're at or closer to where we're at on some things. We just got to do our best. That's all we can do. We have to intervene. And I tell people, don't be the Simpsons. Don't just reduce yourself to being old man yells at cloud, right? You gotta think that we can make a difference. So I really enjoy these conversations, Jamal. I do appreciate the opportunity to come on. Thank you very much.
No, man, I appreciate it. Caleb Maupin. Caleb Maupin is a speaker, writer, journalist, political analyst, and author. His last book, or his book, Kamala Harris and the Future of America, is an essay in 3 parts, examines the life of Kamala Harris and puts her rise to prominence in the context of a changing U.S. political discourse and the geopolitical stage. Caleb, where can people find you?
Well, my organization is at cpiusa.org. We're the Center for Political Innovation. And I got my personal website, calebmaupin.net, CALEBMAUPIN.net. So check us out. Yeah. Always trying to engage with other people about how we can oppose globalism, imperialism, and stand up for working families.
Caleb, always appreciate you, man. Thank you. I appreciate it. Everything that comes out of your mouth. You're very insightful, to put it mildly. Thank you for this.
Yep. Thank you.
All right. We have come to almost the 9 o'clock hour. Margaret Kimberly is going to be coming up. We're also going to have Angie Wong and Peter Coffin. Look, I would take this moment. If you guys dig this content, you find yourself coming back to the show often. I run Monday, 7 a.m. to 10 a.m., Monday through Friday, almost like a clock. I would be here one time on schedule. This morning we had a little bit of technical difficulties, but that's okay. We worked out the technical difficulties and we moved forward. But if you guys really find yourself digging this content, you can support this work through PayPal, Patreon, or for that matter, Super Chats. All chats or stickers will be read, providing they're not racist, sexist, or bigoted. Even if you want to take the piss out of me, I will read those also. It definitely helps the content and it helps the show keep ticking and moving along. Many of these shows get demonetized because of what we talk about. In fact, the show yesterday ended up with, I think we ended up with like 800 people, if not more, nearly 900 people watching live. And that show ended up being completely demonetized. Bastards at YouTube. Well, serenity now, serenity now. My point is your support, even if it's a like, even if it's a share, or for that matter, even if it's donating to the channel, all of those things helps the show out and keeps the show moving along. And you are deeply appreciated for it. While we have a moment, let's do this. Let's go into the chats that we have up to this point. We have a couple. And the first one, now that Israel is invading Syria, do you think the rebels will rethink cutting off Iran, since it's less likely that Turkey and the Gulf states will provide weapons to fight off Israel and theft? I mean, I don't know. I mean, that's kind of a tough question to answer. I mean, I'm kind of with Caleb on this. We'll see. I mean, Russia is saying that their base is secured. So I would imagine some deal had to be made. Even when they met at Doha, something had to take place. What's interesting is in Russia's communique, they pointed out that we had nothing to do with the negotiations, which is pretty wild considering how involved they were in Syria, or for that matter, how involved Iran was in Syria in pushing back on the attacks that were taking place back in 2015. But them saying we weren't involved is giving a clear case that there was some unhappiness in how this broke down. And I don't blame them. I mean, at the end of the day, you invest life or lives, because I think it was several hundred Russian soldiers died in this process. And you invest money, capital, and political clout. And then you have a government that seems to just collapse. Caleb's point of view seems to be that the order was to stand down. Other points of view was that the Syrian army just didn't fight, either because they were paid off or otherwise. I think Caleb is right that this is going to be something that we're going to find out later, as it shakes out and as more information comes out about it. But right now, yeah, I think people are in somewhat shock. I mean, you had a fight that took place where Assad fought tooth and nail to hold on to power and to regain control of the majority of Syria. I think like 90% of Syria. Idlib stayed what it was. Of course, it ended up being a terrorist haven, but for all intents and purposes, the rest of Syria was secured. And then, despite the fact that there was talk about terrorists invading, you got nothing. It was just wild, to put it mildly. I think people are still digesting what happened, and for that part, what it means. And for all of the people who may be celebrating, give it a few weeks. The reason why I say give it a few weeks, when Bush came out and said that the Iraq war was over with, Iraq devolved into all sorts of calamity. When Libya fell, Libya devolved into all sorts of calamity. And I would wager to you that the people in Syria who are royally freaked out right now is thinking that the same thing may happen there. stay tuned. This was not about Assad. This had more to do with the lives of the Syrians. I think it will burn out like Cambodia when the Khmer Rouge overthrew the US-backed Canadian dictatorships. I don't know. Any way you look at it, though, it's chaos. And my heart goes out to the people on the ground in Syria at this point. I want to bring in my guests. We're joined with the one and only Margaret Kimberly. Margaret Kimberly is a senior columnist and editor for Black Agenda Report and author of Prejudicial, Black America, and the Presidents. Margaret, thank you for joining me. How you doing this morning? You doing all right?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much. I'm now
thank you.
obsessing over my lipstick. I think I did something wrong. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
You're perfectly fine. I brought you on a slightly early, so you might have been in the middle of getting everything straight before I brought you on. I'm sorry. But
That's
thank you
okay.
for joining me. I always appreciate you joining me. And my audience loves you on these shows.
I love to come on.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it. I brought you on for a few stories to get back into some domestic politics.
Okay.
I was fascinated by, well, for one, do you want to say anything on the Syrian thing? And the reason, and I start on that just because there's a lot of celebration that is taking place. There's a lot of whitewashing of Jelani, who is effectively a terrorist that has a $10 million bounty on his head from the US, not to mention the bounty from the UK. Basically, they want his life. And yet they are whitewashing him. CNN brought him on to whitewash him, to act like he's just a regular guy who used to do a bit of head chopping in his youth, but it's now developed into, he thought that head chopping was wrong. Like the idea that you come from head chopping and then they're like, but no, he's a better person now. He's diversity friendly jihadist now. So, it'll be okay. That is outrageous to me.
Yes,
that they're
it
even
is.
pushing that line. Give me your take on all of this.
Well, first of all, I'm still in shock. Ever
and I both.
since Saturday, this is now Tuesday, I could not believe that the state fell so quickly. And this is a catastrophe. It's a catastrophe for the world. And let me explain why. The US and Israel now control that entire region. This idea of a greater Israel is now a reality. Excuse me. Palestinian people are now doomed. I hate to be so negative, but it's more important than ever for us to keep talking about the genocide. Amnesty International finally, after a year of genocide, finally announced publicly that this was what everybody else knew. ICC finally issuing arrest warrants. And but the fall of the Syrian state, of a secular Arab state that stood in the way to some degree against US imperial designs, is a disaster. It means that the US has won. It seems that the US is the only country that's really serious about using its power. They struck at the moment to, first of all, to harm Russia. Russia's bogged down in Ukraine, and they guessed correctly it was going to be difficult for them to come to Syria's aid. Turkey, of course, Erdogan is a two-faced backstabber, actually stabs you in the front. Everybody knew what he was up to in wanting to grab a chunk of Syria and in backing these jihadists. Arab states are either bought off by the US, they're US client states like Egypt and Jordan, or the Gulf monarchies, Saudi Arabia, etc. So that's the Arab world, either occupied by the US or US forces or client states. There's no international Arab power, and it's a great tragedy, and it's terrible. It is not a good thing for the US to run everything. The US needs to have counter forces in the world, and they're weak. China is an economic power, but not a military power. Russia is a military power, but can't fight on two fronts. So this is really terrible. And anybody who is applauding the fall of the Syrian state is not to be trusted. If you're an anti-imperialist, You cannot be happy now. The only way people talk about Assad being a dictator and being brutal and all, some of which may be true, some of which is true, but a lot of it's a lie. The only way to bring real democracy to Syria was to keep Assad in place, because Russia had agreements that Assad would negotiate with his opposition, that there would be a new civil society in that country. Now the country's torn apart, but between Israel and jihadists and Turkey, and you're not seeing anything better with this new state that's been decapitated and now has been torn apart. So I'm looking askance at anybody who is cheering what's happening in Syria right now.
Yeah, agreed. All of those beaches with people, women in bikinis, men walking around with no shirt, all of that's over with. Any notion of religion, minorities, I would imagine they are utterly terrified right now. My my producer has family. He's Syrian Lebanese by heritage. He has family that was stuck in Aleppo when it fell. And he said they're terrified. I've had guests who wouldn't even come on the show because they're scared of what may happen based on what they say to family members that are in that area. And so, no, I agree with you wholeheartedly. Like when I look at Libya, when I look at Iraq, all of those places were utter disasters, and they were understood to be disasters. And then for this, they're like, yeah, a head chopper taking over Syria, that should go perfectly fine. No issue here at all.
Well,
Israel,
I tell you, the power of propaganda. You were talking about this jihadist who, with the help of corporate media, who work hand in hand with the state, they tell him to take his turban off. I'm probably wrong in calling it a turban. You know, I think he trimmed his beard a little, took the head wrap off of his head, and that told you the story. The U.S. did not give up taking over Syria. They call them rebels. So the guy who was a jihadist is now just a moderate leader. Using words like rebel is something that confuses a lot of people. So BBC tweeted something about, you know, how he remade his image. He remade his image with the help of the BBC and others like it. So this is a terrible, terrible tragedy. And there has to have been a lot of treachery for the Syrian army basically to have just given up and not even to fight. We'll get the details, I'm sure, in the coming days, but there's nothing good about this. We need a multipolar world, and that is not happening now. The U.S. is more powerful now, and that is never, ever a good thing. The U.S. never has clean hands, doesn't care about dictatorships. Nope. And this is horrible. This is
that's the irony of it, right? Like it's like Assad is a brutal dictator. Saudi Arabia is a dictatorship. Qatar is a dictatorship. All of those countries are dictatorships. We're friends with all of them. We're friends with all of them.
Right.
Just outrageous. And now they're like, Assad needs to see justice. Okay, Netanyahu literally has an ICC arrest warrant. Gallant has an ICC arrest warrant. Gallant just came to New York without any issue at all. Coming to New York, despite the fact that the man is a war criminal. It's astonishing. It is utterly astonishing. Well, I agree with you wholeheartedly on this. I am still digesting it. I was shocked by the whole thing, frankly. I don't know anybody who predicted this at all.
No, the Russians were surprised. I would love to, wouldn't we all love to be flies on the wall and know exactly how this disaster happened and happened so quickly?
I would love to be a fly on the wall in Doha in that conversation because Lavrov came out pissed off big time.
Yeah, well, Erdogan can't be trusted, and Russia is trusting him. That's one thing that's quite clear.
Yeah, I get the sense that he is, he's one of those factors that you can't trust, but you're stuck with dealing with.
Yeah, he's the president of Turkey. Turkey's a power in the region. They can't ignore him, but he plays both sides. Turkey is a member of NATO still. So he cuts deals for himself. He is one of those who picked Syria apart, sent millions of people out of the country, and then made European countries pay him to keep refugees from going into their nations. This guy is a wheeler dealer.
He blackmailed
And
him.
that's a huge part
He
of
was
the
like, "You want more
problem.
of these coming into your country? Give me money.
That's
Give me
right.
money."
Yep.
Israel has taken a huge swath of territory of Syria at this point. They're effectively carving it up. They're 20 kilometers from Damascus. There's talk in Israel that they should take more, basically go all the way to Damascus. I mean, what's going to stop them? They're blowing up any and everything that had to do with Syrian power in this case in order to prevent the jihadists from getting their hands on it. So, no, I agree with you wholeheartedly on this. This is a dark day for anybody that cares about any notion of sovereignty for any of these states. I want to move for a moment to blame game, the blame game. Because right now, it seems the Politico was running this article that Democrats are in this kind of angry stage that, they're going from blame to anger to sadness, et cetera, et cetera. But one of Kamala Harris's campaign managers said something that I think is utterly outrageous. And I don't doubt that it's true. Malik and I had this conversation when it was happening. And as I pointed out to Malik, I was like, yeah, you're right. But that can't be the end all be all. I want to get your take on this clip. This is Kamala Harris's campaign manager. And he is arguing that Black women would have been very upset if they would have basically had a primary. Meaning, if they would have had a primary process, it would have angered Black women, who was a major demographic of the Democratic Party. And as I was pointing out, dude, Black women would have gotten over it. They would prefer that you win as opposed to you running with Kamala Harris and losing. I want to get your take on this clip. This is for campaign manager.
We had 107 days, and I know people don't like that time frame, that number, but to open up a Democratic primary, you would have had Black women, who were the strongest voting bloc for Kamala Harris, be highly upset if it was not Kamala Harris. You would have had someone starting with zero infrastructure. I hear your concern, and I'm not saying that primaries are not important and open primaries are important. We had 107 days.
Is that true? I mean, I guess from my point of view, it's like, yeah, no, I accept they would have been upset. Is that really the end all be all? And wouldn't it have been preferable to win as opposed to, we're going to lose with keeping, I don't know, solidarity with Black women? That just seems outrageous to me. Give me your thoughts on this.
It is outrageous. There's so many, what's the saying? Success has 1,000 fathers, failure is an orphan. So nobody will own up to what really happened in this debacle. There are two versions of events. One is there was going to be an open primary or an open convention, some way of choosing the candidate. And Nancy Pelosi and Obama were behind it, and Biden double-crossed everybody because he was so angry about being kicked out, and he endorsed Kamala Harris and undercut that entire process. So that's one version of events. So then we have this other version of events that, well, it would have looked bad to pass over the vice president, and so you had to pick her, and Black people, Black women especially, would have been angry. Well, I don't buy it. I don't buy that at all. First of all, and I resent them using Black women in order to justify this debacle that brought Donald Trump back to the White House and Republican control of Congress. Black people, I think you are correct. It's unfortunate, but Black people will not only 90% of us support the Democrat, but we'll get over it. It's like, especially if you tell us, in order to defeat Trump, we're going to have an open primary and make sure we have the strongest candidate. There would have been some prominent people who questioned that, but I never felt that Kamala Harris had that kind of connection with the Black community and with Black women that people would have been so upset that they didn't vote for her. So I think it's an excuse. Now, they may have heard from some people who said, and the Black misleaders, as we call them, who said you have to choose her. But I'm not buying it, though. I'm just not. Now there's another version of events that Biden was set up. They knew he couldn't do it, and
Biden was set up. How was
that yes, that they had this debate in June, which was odd. It was so early.
Right, they had it early.
Debates were usually after Labor Day, and that he face planted in the debate. And the idea was to, have him fail and then put Kamala Harris in there. There's so many different things. I have to say again, I was shocked that they stuck with Biden. I figured by 2003 they would have moved against him, that he would have said, actually, what did he call himself, a transitional figure?
Transitional
As I said,
candidate.
I'm a transitional figure. I'm not running for re-election. But they stuck with him. And there were people who were very public, like David Axelrod, as his approval ratings were so low. And it was, he said, I remember on Twitter, it was about a year before Election Day, last November, that he questioned the wisdom of Biden being the nominee. So clearly there was a struggle in the party about what to do about Biden. So which of these things is true? Maybe there's an element of truth in all of them. I don't really know, but I know the Democratic Party rank and file. I'm not a Democrat anymore, but the Democratic Party rank and file need to be very, very angry that their party failed them so badly. And Black women are yes, it's true, are the people they depend upon to win. Black people in general depend upon to win, but we're not treated like it any other time. We always come in at the end of the process. They make some decision or rig it for a certain person, and then Black people are supposed to show up on Election Day and pull their irons out of a fire. I would like to see Black people start to question their relationship with the Democratic Party and start talking about how to change it, because this is clearly not working at all.
Do you get the sense that they are angry with the party? I don't get that sense. I get the sense that they are shocked and confused that she lost.
It's unfortunate that people are not angry with the Democratic Party. They should be. They're mad at, they're mad at people who didn't vote. They're mad at Latinos and, people saying these horrible things. I hope you all get deported. And it's, people mad at Palestinians, mad at Arabs for not voting for the party that's killing their people. But it shows the lack of political maturity, frankly, that so many people have, that politics has been turned into this virtue signaling. Our party is the good party, and that's all we need to know. And everybody should vote for the Democrat because we're voting for the Democrat, and ignoring the reality of other people, ignoring the fact that Black people are not players at all, just expected to turn up. So there's not enough anger. There should be, but I'm a little dispirited because I don't see the reaction that frankly people need to have at this point.
I agree with you. I don't. It seems like they are fundamentally missing why they alienate the rest of the population. My doctor, her and I got into this big back and forth, and she's like, she just doesn't get it. Like for her, it's like, well, Kamala Harris is good. She's great. And people just don't vote for her because she's a woman, and that's the end all be all. And if you look at The View, same thing. That's the argument that Whoopi Goldberg comes out with. Even Hunter Biden, when they pardoned Hunter Biden, their argument boiled down to, well, I don't even consider it a lie. I think it's perfectly fine for him to do this. And it's like, okay, dude, even if you accept that it's fine for him to pardon his kid, let's be honest, it is a lie. It was a cynical political move in order to get from point A to point B, where they wanted to, A, say, we're the party that believes in law and order, where Donald Trump is not. And now Joe Biden is arguing, well, I believe in the law, but I believe that this is politically motivated, that this is politically biased.
The other thing that I find interesting is that no one's taking Biden on for not pardoning anybody else. He's been very stingy with his pardons. This was an opportunity for him to, the optics would have been better, if nothing else, if he pardoned his son and pardoned 10 other people who had been locked up for years in this so-called anti-drug crusade that he drove. This is the guy bragging about the crime bill that put so many people in prison, who said, and if you have a little bit of crack cocaine, you're going to do 5 years. Now, I realize the charges against Hunter Biden had nothing to do with drug possession, but that's in the minds of people. It's like, well, your crackhead son didn't do any time. Come on. But the fact that they didn't even see the reason, a reason to make this look better. Okay, well, pardon Hunter, but I got to pardon some other people too. They're very draconian sentences for in the U.S. in general. He could have pardoned someone in the federal process whose innocence, guilt was in question. I mean, come on, he has the apparatus at his disposal, and to say, I got to pardon other people. You got to give me some more names. But that clearly was not an issue for him at all, nor was it an issue for anybody else in the Democratic Party. Also, this pardon, it goes back to 2014. The charges against Hunter Biden are from 2016 to 2019. Why 2014? Well, that's the Ukraine, his involvement in Ukraine. His son, his dumb son, who was paid $50,000 to do nothing except be named Biden. So he's and as some have said, maybe he's pardoning himself. Maybe there is some sort of conflict of interest. I mean, as I believe, a conflict of interest by its very nature, but some kind of connection that he had with his son doing this work for a Ukrainian energy company. So it all just stinks, to sum up.
Yeah, he goes back 11 years. Like, he literally goes back to the beginning of the Ukraine war. Like, well, I call it the beginning of the Ukraine war. You overthrow the government of a country, then all hell breaks loose after you overthrow it. And yeah, it's very suspicious that he goes back 11 years to that specific date. And it sounds like it's not just about Hunter Biden. It sounds like it might be about him. I mean, hell, one of the cases on the Black Agenda Report, you guys were talking about the Uhuru case, and how the sentencing is coming up December,
Monday,
December
the 16th.
16th, thank you. December 16th. That case is outrageous because they are effectively criminalizing what this person represents, meaning First Amendment rights at this point, and now being criminalized. His own political point of view is being criminalized. And they're acting as if, because his point of view was antagonistic to the US, that somehow he was working with the Russians. All of this is outrageous in and of itself. I mean, look, from my point of view, social media stuff going around the First Amendment in order to push social media companies to get rid of content that they didn't particularly like, or in this case, going after outright prosecutions of this group. Go into this a little bit, just to give the public a little heads up about how outrageous this was, that they went after this group. I believe they were in Florida, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, Omali Yeshitela and two other co-defendants known as the Uhuru Three were indicted. They were accused of being agents of Russia. Now, prosecutors always do this. They hit you with a lot of charges to increase the likelihood that you'll be convicted of something. So they were charged with being foreign agents of Russia, and also charged with conspiracy. Now, the jury acquitted them of the charge of being agents of Russia, but convicted them of conspiracy, which is, it doesn't make sense. So you're saying they weren't agents, but they were conspiring to do something that never happened? It's Omali. I spoke to Omali last week on Black Agenda Radio, and it's thought crime. That's all it is. I consider it prosecutorial misconduct, frankly, in my opinion, to cook up charges just to make sure you get somebody for something. And so basically what they're saying is, by opposing U.S. foreign policy about Ukraine, about any number of things, that makes you suspect, makes you an agent of another country. And if we can't prove it, we'll make sure we get you for something and say that you conspired to do this. So we will see on Monday, the 16th, their sentencing in Tampa, Florida, takes place.
What kind of charges are they
terrible.
facing?
This is a warning to all of us who are activists, who are journalists, We see what happened with your former platform, which the U.S. sanctioned Sputnik, sanctioned RT. You can't be on these channels. You can't, if you want to listen to them. They've deprived us of the right to hear what we want to hear. And but then they talk about other countries being dictatorships or not being democratic. And this, by the way, and this is happening in the Democratic Party, not Trump, but a Democrat who's supposed to be so much better. And today is December 10th is Human Rights Day, and our human rights are violated by a government that is insisting on having its way around the world and insisting on silencing dissent. So nobody wants to end up in federal court like the Uhuru 3. So it stifles speech. Entire platforms are removed. African Stream was taken off YouTube. Yes, Google just removed them because Antony Blinken claimed they were agents of Russia. So that's a human right, to be able to speak, to be able to get information as you want. And once again, we see that the U.S. Is a big human rights violator in so many different ways.
What are they risking in regards to the sentencing that's coming up?
No one knows. They could get up to, I believe it's 5 years in prison, but of course judges have leeway. It could be, I would hope that it's probation, or, O'Malley is in his 80s. I would hope that would be taken into account. I would hope the fact that they were acquitted of the more serious charge is taken into account. But, we don't know if this is a hanging judge. We don't know if this is a judge who would use some tender justice with mercy or have some common sense. We have no idea. But we will find out on Monday. So I'm glad you mentioned them. I feel like they have not gotten enough attention because this is everybody's fate. They can, if you've been to a certain country or you talk to people from that country or have any connection with them, that you can be accused of being an agent for a foreign government, and you can end up in a courtroom or potentially behind bars.
That is outrageous. I remember when this case first came down, and there is something chilling about what they seem to be doing. Why do you think they're taking this aggressive action like this? Meaning it wasn't this way prior. What do you think changed where they gotten so much more aggressive on this idea of going after contrary opinions to the U.S. government?
I think it's that as the U.S. Escalates wars, escalates its effort to have hegemony over the entire world, they see it as important to stamp out any dissent. And of course, Black people, we're always the first ones, the first victims of these efforts to silence anyone who wants to promote a different, express a different narrative, who wants to express a political difference. If you look at Paul Robeson and others who had their passports revoked in the 1950s, people like Claudia Jones who were deported, it's always Black people who go first. So I think it's the inherent racism of the system, of the legal system, and it's combined with this new determination for the U.S. to be the world's hegemon. And it comes down to people being persecuted and prosecuted.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. I agree with you on that. They feel pressure. They feel like this notion of hegemony is kind of ending, and they're doing any and everything in their power to maintain that level of control, especially on media. Margaret, thank you for this. I always appreciate these conversations. Margaret Kimberly, she's a senior columnist and editor for Black Agenda Report and author of Presidential, Black America and the Presidents. You can find Margaret at Freedom Ride blog. Is there anywhere else that people can find you, just in case?
On X, Twitter, Freedom Ride blog. You can read me every week in blackagendareport.com. And I'm also on Blue Sky as Margaret Kimberly, and I have a Patreon, Margaret Kimberly.
Very cool. Thank you for this. I really appreciate it.
Thank
You have a
you.
good one.
You too.
All right. I want to go to my next guest. We are joined with Peter Coffin. Peter Coffin is a journalist with over 250,000 YouTube subscribers, podcaster, and author. In their book, Custom Reality and You, they explore reality in a world where profit is the driving force. Peter, thank you for joining me, man. How you doing this morning?
I'm good. How about yourself?
So far, so good. I'm here. I am awake, aware, and I am not living in Syria. So I can't complain regardless of what else is going on with my life.
I mean, you could, but it would look superfluous.
Yes. Yes. It would look bad considering. So no, I agree with you, man. Thank you for joining me, man. I'm waiting on Angie, but I want to start. I want to get your take on something. So this broke yesterday. Right here. Daniel Perry. This is the subway choker.
Okay.
He was acquitted in the subway death of the guy he choked to death. And to be clear, what it boiled down to, what I suspect was a self-defense issue that other people on the subway. In fact, Mayor Adams had a fascinating take on this. Adams was like, yeah, if people are being harassed or people are being threatened on the subway, I would hope that other New Yorkers get involved in order to protect the people that are on the subway. Now, speaking to Ted Rawl lives in New York, and Rawl was talking about how riding the subways can be a terrifying experience in New York because it seems that all of the mentally ill people also just so happen to ride the subway. And that, you know, anybody who has been on a New York subway has dealt with some level of harassment of being on that subway.
No, unless you're the harasser.
Well, that is true.
It's kill or be killed out there, Jamal.
That is true. Thank you. I don't want to disinclude the harassers in this group. But there's an interesting question to be asked. You know, I guess my thing is, I don't take issue with Perry choking him, if that makes sense. Like, meaning, I don't take issue with him defending people on the subway. I take issue with the death.
Yeah.
Meaning you couldn't let him go a minute before. Like, it's that part.
It's excessive.
It comes across as a bit excessive to me. But a jury of his peers found him not guilty.
Yeah, the thing about that is you can't just like accidentally choke somebody to death in like 30 seconds. That's not how it works. You have to do it for a long period of time to actually, you know, injure someone to the point where it threatens their life. You have to cut off oxygen to the brain for a long time. It's deliberate when it happens. You have to do it. Like, if you remember with the whole George Floyd situation, he had a knee on his neck for, I think it was 8 minutes and some
it was like 9 minutes, give or take.
9. Yeah, it was a long
9 minutes. Yeah.
I mean, regardless of, there's tons of controversy over how that happened, but it shouldn't shock anybody to be choking somebody for 9 minutes that it would kill them. Like, but there's a point where, like, let's say you choke somebody out for 30 seconds. That's not going to do that. It's not even kind of going to do that. It might knock them out. It might knock them. It might not even knock them out, honestly, if it's 30 seconds. So, I mean, it's deliberate. There's a point where it's too much. Like, you could punch him. Like it's not, I'm not saying that it's great to go ahead and punch people on the subway, but if there's somebody that is dangerous and hurting somebody else, I think that's probably a better solution than choking them for a period long enough to kill them.
Or let the guy go. I mean, like, I guess at a certain point, because the people I remember were on the subway and they were telling him, like, dude, like, you're going to kill him. And because initially the reports are that he had him for like 15 minutes. Then they found out, okay, well, it wasn't 15 minutes. But it's like, okay, whether it was 15 minutes or whether it was 6, whether it was 8.
Yeah, 6 is a lot.
Yeah, clearly it was long enough to stop him. But New Yorkers who also might have rode those subways, who might have had to deal with people who were harassing them, might have came to a different assessment. I think it. I mean, I could be wrong, but I can't. Clearly they were giving testimony that this was in defense of the larger group and that the person was a threat. And what's his name? Mayor Adams even came out and said, like, yeah, he was like, there was a lot of propaganda around this. The people who they were showing, they was like showing him when he was like young, like they show him as a, as a 12-year-old boy and say, oh, look at this safe and harmless man and stuff like that. And it's like, okay, well, that's not really the guy that they were confronting at that moment on the subway. Adams is fascinating to me because Adams seems like he had a come to Jesus moment. And the moment that Trump was elected, he was defending Trump's policies, especially on the issue of immigration. Adams has complained about immigration before, so I take that with a grain of salt. But even when he was on The View, he was pushing back on a lot of the stuff that Goldberg and that other lunatic, Joy Behar, were saying on air. And I was like, okay, Adams has had a come to Jesus. Either the case that was brought against them, I don't know what it was, but something seemed to have changed with Adams politically on that front. I don't know what it was. It was just fascinating to me. He seemed to have had a total realignment.
Yeah, the whole thing is kind of crazy, and it's not as if he is exclusive in that. There's a lot of people that I have seen that are just kind of like the last year, I think, really harmed the Democrats, because there are a lot of people that I've seen go through something similar. Obviously, they haven't gone through the same kind of event, but I've seen a lot of people go through that same kind of like, you know what? I've been lied to a lot about this. I've seen a bunch of stuff that's just not, it's not real. It's provably not real. Like, I mean, we've gone over it several times when talking about the election, the whole like bloodbath thing. There's a number of incidents like that with Trump where he said something like the Liz Cheney thing. That's the way that the news reported that was so obviously fake. It was not. Anybody with a brain knows that he wasn't saying anything controversial or strange. He was actually saying something that anti-war people have said for decades and decades. Not of Liz Cheney specifically, but of politicians. I don't know. There's just a lot of people who have seen, I think, big changes in the last few months. It's kind of just becoming this running total that's too much. It's gotten past a point where people are. I've seen people who I did not expect to be supporting Trump. Let's say.
What do you mean? Give me an example. Like, you mean just. So, for example, Anna Kasparian. Anna Kasparian has been fascinating to me. She has had this weird political arc where she has been pissed off at lefties. She says she felt like they abandoned her. She called them an occult, which is astonishing. And she's on the Young Turks, which calls itself a progressive outlet and is blue no matter who in pretty much every election, despite the fact that they would complain about Democrats and everything else. Anna has come out recently saying, I met a friend of mine that's a Trump supporter. She said when she got to know him, she realized this, oh my God, he's not this monster that everybody said he was. And even pushing back on the left on some of the more extreme elements of what they would call like kind of the social politics, not economic stuff.
Sure.
So yeah, I guess I do see it in a few people on this front. What do you think it is, though? Do you think it's just the Democratic Party has moved so far away from the economic angle that they've gotten more into the social policy that they are leaving people behind, they're alienating people? What do you think it is that has caused those people to kind of shift in their political alignment? Or did they shift at all? Was it just the party has moved beyond them? I would say I didn't leave the Democratic Party. It left me. And I think a lot of people would say that.
Sure.
What do you think it is?
I think that there's kind of two versions of it. If I'm completely honest, I'm not super impressed by Anna Kasparian. Like, I think that she has decided at a very
wait a minute, just to interrupt. To be fair, I'm not impressed by her at all. And I take the piss out of her all the time. I was more shocked by this arc that she seems to be going through now. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no. Well, no, the thing is, I agree with a lot of what she's saying. That's not what it's not that I think that she is wrong. It's that people like myself have said a lot of similar things for a long time, and I'm far from the only person who has done that. I know countless people who have been very critical of the Democrats, and really, she's been very critical of the Democrats. It's not really exactly what I'm saying. I have been very critical. Like I've made stuff like this Horseshoe Theory is Right book, which is it's showing the left as it exists in the United States as not really, I mean, maybe it takes different moral stances and has different aesthetics, but functionally is ultimately the same thing and protects the same things as the right, the institutions. I've been saying that for a very long time, and you know, I don't necessarily say it horseshoe theory in the way that Noberto Bobbio, the guy who came up with that, is saying it. I'm saying it on a class basis. I think they both represent different factions of one class. But you know, I have gotten attacked for that for a very long time, and she is among the type of person that has attacked me for it and has said, you know, there's problems with the left, but it's very different. And to say things like that, it's wrong. It's very wrong. And I see her go on shows like Glenn Beck, and rather than approach people like myself, because there are people like myself who have been doing this who are of much higher profile, that she could approach and do these shows with that type of a person who has an actual, you know, class analysis or any of that. These people, you know, 4 or 5 years ago were calling the type of person that I am a class reductionist and canceling us and attacking us. And rather than coming to us, because our opinion hasn't changed, class hasn't become something different in the United States, they go to the Glenn Becks and the grifters of the other side and show off there. Oh, I have figured it out. It's like I am not impressed by that. I think it's a very cynical thing to do, because if you were really serious about the things that you're saying, and because I agree with a lot of them, let me be clear, there's a lot of things that Anna Kasparian is saying right now that I very much agree with, but I feel like there is a segment of people like myself who have said those things and have gotten shit on for many, many years. And, you know, we're as far as I'm not a lunatic. I certainly don't go out and make unprovable claims. I don't do that type of stuff. I say things that are observably true, and I get shit on for it. and these are the types of people that have shat on me traditionally. They, if they really are serious about what they're saying, need to come to people like myself. And again, like I said, there are people like myself that are saying things like this that are significantly higher profile than myself. And you go to them. I'm not even saying like come to me. Go to them.
Why do you think she went to Glenn Beck? I mean, because you're right. Now that I think about it, the Glenn Beck thing is very weird. I remember when I saw her, I was like, I guess my first thought was like, okay, well, why are you on Glenn Beck? That was the first question. And then I was listening to her like, okay, I kind of agree with that. Then she went on Piers Morgan. That was the other person she went on. She was talking to Piers Morgan about the left, basically trashing elements of the left. Do you think she's going on these shows because in their mind, Trump won? Clearly, there's something that is going on with Trump where all of the working class, many of the young people didn't show up for. And this is her way of trying to get a certain amount of bona fides with the right. Like, why do you think all of a sudden she went to Glenn Beck, of all people?
Well, I think it's because these people do not have the class analysis. Like, this is a documentary. I would urge anybody who's currently watching to go to my YouTube channel, Very Important Documentaries, and watch this. Or if you don't like watching me in a jockey costume saying funny things and making the points, buy this book on Amazon.
And just so the audience will know, it's called what's the name of the book?
Horseshoe Theory is Right, but Not How You Think. Which I think is a good title. I'm just gonna pat myself on the back there for a minute. But I think that it's a situation where these people don't have this class analysis. So they don't see that Glenn Beck is the same thing as what's a popular one, like that David Pakman. They're the same thing. They're just they look different, they sound different, they say things that are ultimately, sound like they are in conflict with one another, but they're protecting the same things. They may not be of the ruling class, but they're certainly aligned with the ruling class. And this isn't to shit on David Pakman or anything. I think that he has, a lot of things that he's correct about, but he's also very incorrect on Israel as far as I'm concerned. But his analysis stops when it comes to questioning these institutions on a fundamental level. He won't do it. He can't do it. He's not, and that's not to say like, oh, he needs to be a good socialist. I don't really care if people are socialist or not. I think that if we ultimately held the institutions accountable in a smart way, we would land on something that looks like socialism. Whether we call it socialism or not, I don't really care what words we use. I think it would be nice to hold institutions accountable. But the point is, if you asked him, should we completely fundamentally change the economic and social systems we live in, he would say, absolutely not. What are you, insane? And so would Glenn Beck. Like these people are not people who want to change things. They want the class of people that's ruling right now to be ruling. They don't, while they may not like corruption, they'll defend it if the person who is attacking the corruption wants to change things on a fundamental level. And when I see somebody like Anna Kasparian who is saying the things that she's saying, which are ultimately probably more in alignment with a person like myself, going that direction, it just says to me they don't understand, or worse, they are themselves a grifter and just going where the cloud is currently. But I try to take a generous or charitable position. They don't understand. Like the thing that they're complaining about, they're going to the other side of that thing and appealing to that instead. Like it's ultimately, like you talked about, the Democratic Party has lost the economic part of what they have claimed to be about for years and years and what they built their reputation on decades ago. The reason that's gone is because ultimately they can't pursue those things without rubbing up against class conflict, and class conflict leads us to, different economic and social systems. I would, if I were able to speak to somebody like Anna Kasparian, I would ask them if they understand that they're would I go on Piers Morgan? Absolutely. I would go on Piers Morgan in a second. Would I go on Glenn Beck? Absolutely. And I would probably come off in a similar way. It's just, I associate with people who I specifically think have that analysis. And I go on smaller right-wing things. But the point isn't to, be like, you know what? You were right about the left.
Right.
The point is to gain exposure for the things that I say everywhere, whether it's on a left thing or a right thing. And I don't see that with this. With this, I see Anna Kasparian, and I see other people do it too. They go on and they, you know what? The left, they really are crazy.
Yeah.
And it's not like they aren't. I don't think that they are normal or not crazy. It's just that that's not the point,
Yeah. I remember I had this guy send me a text one day, an email, and he says, dude, he said, I used to watch your show just to joke you. He says, I used to be a troll. And he said, I realized after like several months that I was watching your show every day. And he says, I am a hardcore right winger. He said, but I agree with 70% of what you said. And I was thinking to myself, okay, then you're not a right winger. There's no way. And it made me realize that people start to identify so much with a particular thing that they tend to defend that thing. They tend to see themselves as that thing. And, I would point out, I was like, okay, look, these people are corrupt. These people aren't looking out for your interests. We need to have increase the minimum wage. The issue, Social Security needs to be expanded. There should be health care. And it's like, but if you agree with that stuff, then you're not a right winger. Like
yeah, but you're not a left winger either.
You're not a Democrat, at least, because the Democratic Party doesn't believe in that stuff either. I guess, and you're so right about this idea of the class analysis and how you're ultimately going to run up against a system that is against that very thought. Like Sanders, I remember one of the best questions in the world was asked about Sanders was that if Sanders actually won, and Sanders actually believed in that stuff and was pushing for that stuff, at some point he's going to realize The mechanics of the system disallows me to do what I actually want to do. And what does he do at that point? That is a fascinating question, right? Like, what do you do when you realize that the very thing that you want to accomplish runs up against the very system to which you operate in? I don't have an answer for that.
I think Bernie Sanders has answered that question for us. If I'm completely honest, I think he's given us that answer in the last year. Well, several years, honestly. The way that
Joe Biden is the most progressive president since FDR, according to Sanders.
Yeah, my old friend Joe. I don't know. The thing that bothers me about Bernie Sanders is through the election, he supported Kamala Harris, and he showed us, you know, Kamala Harris is still a progressive. Kamala Harris, like, he's defended her in ways that, frankly, are credibility shaking as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
And then after the election, he goes, "Oh, the Democrats have left the working class behind. That's the problem." And it's like, Bernie, you can't turn around and say that when the election's done, because that was the problem of the election. And it was clear during the election, and it was clear during the 2020 election. Even though Joe Biden won, it wasn't because of Joe Biden. It was because a lot of people, specifically Democrats, were still looking at this in this left-right paradigm that I've been criticizing as about class. And things didn't get marginally better during Trump, although, to be clear, like, Trump did have to deal with COVID, and I think a lot of people gloss over that. Things didn't get significantly better. They got marginally better, and probably in temporary ways, to be clear. And that wasn't what people wanted with Trump. So a lot of people swung back the other way as a protest vote. There was some protest vote for Trump with the original Trump supporters. It's that clear. And they're showing their faces again in the wake of this election, as he's named certain people to his cabinet that they very vehemently oppose. I've seen more than a few of those people come back and be like, but it's not as if the Democratic Party has done anything that is shocking in the last 4 years. Bernie Sanders coming after the election and saying, well, the reason they lost. It's like, no, the reason they lost is things that you were allegedly running against, Bernie, like when you were running for president. And the problem is that when you were running for president, you never decided, you know what? These are the bad guys. Yeah. I'm running against them.
Yes. Oh, that's such a good point.
And
I mean, go ahead, please. No, continue.
Well, I was just going to say, like, you can't turn around after the election, after they lost, after they've done all the things that they've done directly to you, Bernie Sanders, and say with a straight face, after saying all of the stuff that he said defending Kamala Harris and telling people they have to vote for her to avoid fascism, and then be like, you know what, I kind of think that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. might be a good health person. It's like, no, you've been acting like that is the opposite of reality. And now that they're in, you're acting like that's the correct thing. So it's like, I see that. I mean, Bernie Sanders, in all seriousness, a few years ago was the standard bearer for progressivism in the United States. And to see him do essentially, in my opinion, the same thing that I'm criticizing Anna Kasparian for doing, to just run over to the right and be like, yo, you know what, the Democrats are definitely bad. It comes off as fake. He might be saying things that are true. I also think that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. as a health secretary might do something about sugar regulation, which I'm very, very passionate about. It's a serious problem in terms of the diet of Americans. You don't have choices that don't have a shitload of added sugar. That's a serious problem. You have to do so much in order to avoid tons of added sugar. And if he addresses that, I am in full support of it. It just not even I mean, I have problems with him in other areas, but if that's something that as health secretary he addresses, that is an unambiguous win for the American people. I think that, but it's not something that I just recently came up with. I have criticisms for Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and I have things that I align with him on as well. That's not like I don't play the team sport thing. I'm well aware of the problems of Trump, and I'm well aware that Trump also went to North Korea and tried to initiate peace talks
Yes.
instead of what every other president has done. I'm aware
Yes.
that there are good things and bad things about all of these people, and I have said those things whether they're ahead or behind. it's
Last question. I guess, why do you think Sanders does that? I mean, because you're right. It seems that he thinks the Democratic Party is the best option out of bad options. And I don't think he quite gets that if he would be willing to criticize the party, that he may actually get a better candidate. Like, meaning his undying support. They can always go to Sanders when they want to say, hey, this person is progressive. Ain't that right, Sanders? Yep, the person is progressive. And then
Absolutely.
immediately after the election, he attacks the guy. He attacks the party. Oh, they've abandoned the working class. Well, like,
You got to attack them during the election, my man.
Exactly.
It has to be when it matters, not when it doesn't.
I agree with you, man.
It's tough. It's tough. It drives me nuts because, frankly, these people, like, I owe something to them. It's not that I don't. Like Bernie Sanders, if Bernie Sanders hadn't done what he'd done in 2015, if he hadn't run for president as a Democrat, I wouldn't have any of what I have in terms of visibility. I certainly wouldn't have had any momentum in terms of, being willing to be critical in a lot of situations. Like there's things, I think that there's things that I owe to that man, but I also see there is a serious problem in the way that he operates. I mean, in a lot of ways, he opened the door for a lot of people like yourself and myself to be able to be critical and not be completely cast out. But also in the way that he has over the years defended the Democratic establishment. There are ways that we're not allowed to be critical of it. Right. And it gets us in trouble because, Bernie Sanders, a standard bearer, has put this guardrail on and he's enforced it. It's like, I'm sorry, like there's a serious problem in that. Like if he's serious about the things that he wants to change, you have to be critical at all times. And it sucks because and there's a lot of people who think I get accused of being a right winger very often simply because I am very critical of the left. Right. That is enough to get me labeled as a right winger or a class reductionist with certain circles. I dislike that very significantly. And it's because of people like Bernie Sanders. They're people who they get the most time and attention. And when they don't go further, when they don't consistently criticize on the basis that if I wanted Medicare for all, I would need to plow over a lot of these people. They are in my way. They are my enemies, my obstacles. They're defending the other side that doesn't want any of that to happen. They're not with me. They're with them. And I can't defend them because they are my problem.
Yeah.
I don't know. And because of that, like when I say these two sides are ultimately part of one thing, they're ultimately funding the institutions that are corrupt, even if they observe something correct, that it doesn't change what they're ultimately there for. I get called a right winger because that sounds too centrist. And it's there's centrism, and then there is understanding that there are problems with both sides.
No, I agree with you. I think there are problems with both sides. I agree with your take that these guys are two wings on the same bird.
Yeah, exactly. I used that in my documentary. I made a big old picture of a bird, and I did the same thing.
Peter Coffin. Peter Coffin is a journalist with over 250,000 YouTube subscribers, podcaster, and author. In their book, Custom Reality and You, they explore reality where a world where profit is the driving force. You can find Peter on YouTube and Twitter, and you can purchase their book on Amazon.com. Peter, man, thank you for this. And of course, there's this book. The Horseshoe Theory is right.
It's $6 on Amazon because it's not a big book. You're not stuck with a big old novel with this one that makes its point and gets out.
It's like short, sweet, to the point, and calls it a day. Yeah. Thank you, Peter, man. I really appreciate it. Always enjoy talking to you. Thank you for this. You have a good day, okay?
You too. Thanks a lot, man.
All right. We have come to the end of another show. Jamal Thomas morning show. We have one more chat, and that is friends and family. Don't let friends and family go to McDonald's. Remember, that when you complain about your health care, effectively, McDonald's gives you cancer or something. Yeah, bad food. That's what we take in our bodies. It's has bad outcomes. Fair enough, Sir Bike Sabat. Much appreciated. Guys, I am going to call it a day because I have more moving to do. So if you dig this content, like it, share it, subscribe to it. I'm trying to get to 40K by the end of the year. I am on my way to doing so, and I can do so with your help. Also, if you really dig the content, you can support it through PayPal, Patreon, or for that matter, Super Chats. All stickers will be read, providing they're not racist, sexist, or bigoted. You all have a phenomenal day. I will see you bright and early, God willing, Wednesday morning. Have a good one, all. Signing off.